Hey everyone. Welcome back to Fiction Moon. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry was a fallen seraph reincarnated and his wings of judgment shattered Azkaban's walls? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The boy beneath the stairs. The cupboard smelled like dust and old trainers and the particular kind of silence that settles when a house has decided you don't matter. Harry had lived in that silence for 11 years before Hogwarts. He'd learned to read it the way sailors read weather, the difference between Aunt Petunia's tight-lipped quiet, which meant chores were coming, and Uncle Vernon's red-faced quiet, which meant something worse. He knew the creak of the third stair, the particular click of the deadbolt on his cupboard door, the exact moment the television volume went high enough that no one would hear anything else. He was 13 now. He knew a great many things he wished he didn't. The summer had been bad. Not the worst had been the summer before second year, the bars on the window, the cat flap for meals, the slow grinding certainty that he might simply disappear and no one would notice. This summer sat just below that. Vernon had taken the school letters, all of them, as if confiscating Harry's connection to the magical world might somehow make Harry less magical. As if the thing that lived inside Harry's chest was the kind of thing that could be deadbolt away. It couldn't. Harry was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound at the very edge of hearing, not quite identifiable, not quite ignorable. Something warm and very, very old. He'd always had it. He'd assumed, for years, that everyone did. Some core of steady light that sat behind the ribs and watched. He'd assumed it was just what it felt like to be alive. Then he'd gone to Hogwarts and met other people who were alive, and he'd slowly realized, no. They didn't have this. This was his. Tonight, the Dursleys had had a dinner party. This was relevant because dinner parties at number 4, Privet Drive meant Harry was to be invisible. Not merely quiet, invisible. He was to have eaten beforehand from whatever Petunia had left in a covered dish on the counter, he was to have retreated to his room, now, since Dobby's letter-writing campaign last year had made the cupboard politically inconvenient, and he was to make no sound suggesting he existed. He'd managed this until approximately 9 o'clock, when Dudley had decided, with the particular genius of a boy who had never faced consequences, to tell one of Vernon's colleagues that his cousin was a freak who went to a school for criminal children. Vernon had not hit him. Vernon had learned, after the incident with the glass tank in the zoo and the subsequent 2 years of magical consequences, to be more surgical. He'd simply taken Harry's trunk. Everything in it. Every book, every robe, every photograph. His wand, which Harry had only just gotten back after Dobby's meddling. His Nimbus 2000, still flight-worthy. The photo album Hagrid had given him, with his parents waving from every page. And he'd locked it in the garden shed. Then he'd locked Harry in the cupboard. Just to remind him, Harry suspected, that the cupboard was always an option. That rooms were privileges. That the natural state of things was dust and silence and a door with a deadbolt on the wrong side. Harry sat in the cupboard with his knees up and his back against the wall and listened to the dinner party winding down through the floor above him. Laughter. The particular bright sound of people who had never once sat in a small dark space and tried to calculate whether anyone would notice if they simply ceased. He wasn't crying. He'd stopped doing that around age 7, when he'd understood that crying in the cupboard only made it harder to breathe. He was just, sitting. Thinking. Doing the very controlled kind of thinking that lives adjacent to rage but hasn't become it yet. His parents were dead because of Voldemort. He'd survived when he shouldn't have. He was supposedly famous, supposedly special, supposedly the boy who lived, and he was sitting in a cupboard in Surrey because a fat man with a mustache had decided that the best use of his Thursday evening was reminding a 13-year-old where he stood. The thing in his chest stirred. It didn't do that often. It had done it before, in moments of real danger or real injustice, moments that crossed some threshold Harry couldn't name. When he'd found out about his parents. When the basilisk had been hunting Muggle-born students. When he'd watched Ginny Weasley disappear into a diary like smoke. It stirred now, and this time it didn't settle back down. This is wrong. Harry didn't think those words. They rose from somewhere below thought, from the ancient warm thing that had been sitting quietly behind his ribs for 13 years, and they carried with them a weight that ordinary words didn't have. Not moral outrage, though it was that too. Something older. The way a mountain is not angry when it splits open, it simply does what it has always, eventually, done. This is wrong, and it has been wrong for a very long time. The temperature in the cupboard changed. It didn't get warmer or colder, it became more present, the way air feels before lightning. Harry looked at his hands in the dark and found he could see them. Not because a light had come on. Because light was coming from them, from just beneath the skin, the faint silver luminescence of something that had been sealed very tightly for a very long time and was beginning, with the patient inevitability of water through stone, to find the cracks. He heard his own heartbeat. Felt it. And then felt something else beneath it, a second rhythm, older and steadier, like a bell that had been rung once and would ring forever. Sariel. He didn't know the word. It came up from somewhere he didn't have access to, labeled nothing, attached to no memory. Just a name. Just the sound of something enormous recognizing itself. The light under his skin got brighter. Harry pressed his hands flat against the floor of the cupboard and breathed, and tried to hold whatever this was inside the cage of his ribs, not because he was afraid of it, which was strange, because it was enormous and it was old and it was waking up in him like a sunrise seen from the inside, but because he didn't know what it would do, and the dinner party was still happening upstairs, and he had a faint, distant certainty that whatever was happening to him right now was not small. You've been patient, he thought, or something in him thought, and it was addressed inward, to the warm thing, to the bell, to Sariel. I know. I know you have. The warm thing did not respond in words. It never did. But the light steadied. And then, all at once, with no build-up, no warning, nothing but the simple physical fact of a force that had waited long enough, every light on Privet Drive went out. Not just the house. The street. Every lamp, every window, every porch light and television glow. The whole road went dark in a single simultaneous instant, as if the light itself had been drawn away, pulled down into number 4 like water down a drain, and for one heartbeat the garden was lit not by anything outside but by the shadow of 2 wings falling across the garden wall. They were enormous. They were silver-white at the base, where they met something like light itself, and where the feathers ended they darkened to a color that wasn't quite black, the color of the moment before a judgment is rendered, of the weight on the wrong side of a scale. The shadow held for 1 breath, 2, 3. Then the lights came back. Every one, all at once, on the whole street, as if they'd never been out. Harry sat in the cupboard with his hands pressed to the floor and his heart hammering, and the seal, some part of him knew this word with total authority, the way you know words in your native language before you know them. The seal pressed back closed, barely, like a wound sutured too hastily over something that hadn't finished moving. He could hear the dinner party overhead. They hadn't noticed. Or if they had, they were blaming the power company. He sat very still for a very long time. Then he stood up, because he was Harry Potter and he had never once in his life been improved by sitting in small dark spaces, and he put his shoulder against the cupboard door and he pushed, not with magic, or not only with magic, but with the simple, ancient, devastating force of something that has decided a door no longer has authority over it. The deadbolt snapped. He walked out into the hallway, walked through the back of the house, walked to the garden shed, and stood in front of the padlock for a moment. He didn't touch it. He looked at it with the same calm, assessing patience he'd felt in the cupboard, the weight of judgment feeling, the this is wrong and so it will be corrected feeling. The padlock clicked open. He took his trunk. He took his wand. He took the photo album, and he held it for a moment, his parents waving at him from a beach somewhere, his mother's hair red in the sunlight, and the thing in his chest made a sound like a chord played on an instrument with no name. He went upstairs. He packed the rest of his things methodically, 3.5 minutes, top to bottom, nothing left behind. He wrote a note that said, simply, I won't be coming back for summers, and left it on the kitchen table because it was true and because he'd been told his whole life to be grateful, and he found, tonight, that he was completely out of gratitude for people who had never earned it. He walked out the front door. He stood on the street with his trunk and his owl cage. Hedwig was out hunting, she'd find him, she always did, and he held out his wan hand, and the night bus arrived before he'd even finished the gesture, with its usual eardrum-assaulting bang, headlights blazing, Stan Shunpike hanging off the front looking startled. There's a kid, I can see him, Stan. He looks, I know, Stan. Harry climbed aboard and paid and sat down and did not look at his reflection in the window because he had a feeling it would look different, and he wasn't ready for different yet. He was still in the process of becoming it. The night bus roared off into the night, bouncing through space and physics with its usual cheerful disregard for both. Diagon Alley in August was chaos organized into roughly the shape of commerce, and Harry loved it with the specific, visceral love of someone who had spent most of his life in places that didn't want him. The leaky cauldron smelled like fire whiskey and old wood and the particular magical warmth of a place where strange people had been comfortable for centuries. Tom the innkeeper gave Harry a room with barely a raised eyebrow. He'd been dealing with wizards long enough to know when not to ask questions, and Harry put his trunk down and opened the window and sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Hedwig arrived 20 minutes later, dropping through the window with an imperious sweep of white wings and landing on his shoulder with the air of a bird who has crossed half of England and found the whole exercise beneath her but tolerable. She pressed her head against his cheek. He pressed back. I left, he told her. She ruffled her feathers in a way that clearly communicated that she considered this several years overdue. He slept, and did not dream, or if he did the dreams were not the kind that leave footprints. In the morning he went to Gringotts, withdrew what he needed, and stepped out into Diagon Alley with the particular freedom of a person who has removed a weight they'd been so long carrying they'd stopped noticing its shape. The alley was loud and bright and full of families doing back-to-school shopping. He recognized the rhythm, parents with lists, children breaking away toward Quidditch supply shops and the joke outlet near the far end, the particular controlled chaos of a world that had its own rules and expected everyone to know them. He'd always watched this from slightly outside it, the way you watch a party through a window. Today it felt different. Today he walked into it instead of alongside it. He had a list. Hermione would have already gotten her books. Ron would be getting his at the last possible minute. Harry was somewhere in the middle, methodical about it, buying what he needed without drama, moving through Madame Malkin's and Flourish and Blots and the apothecary with the ease of someone who had spent 2 years learning exactly how this world worked and had finally, this morning, decided to be fully in it. He was coming out of the apothecary, jar of flobberworm mucus under one arm, when he nearly walked into someone. Sorry, no, oh. Harry. Neville Longbottom had grown 3 inches over the summer. He was still round-faced and prone to an anxious energy that manifested as slightly too quick movements, but he'd grown, and something about the set of his shoulders had changed. He was carrying a large paper bag that clinked when he shifted it, and his grandmother, formidable, iron gray, a hat that could have intimidated a small country, was standing outside Ollivander's looking like someone who had made peace with moving fast. Neville, Harry said. Good summer. Something passed across Neville's face that wasn't quite the usual stammering deflection. It settled into something quieter. Gran took me to see them, he said. Mum and Dad. At St. Mungo's. Harry didn't say I'm sorry because he'd found, the one time he'd said it to Neville before, that Neville didn't want sorry. He wanted to be seen. How were they? Same. Neville looked at the jar under Harry's arm, then at Harry's face, and something in his expression shifted, a slight narrowing of the eyes, the look of someone registering a change they can't quite name. You look different. I'm not. You are. Neville said it simply, no challenge in it. Then, the new defense books are brilliant, by the way. Lupin's the new professor, did you know? Gran says he's the best they've had in a decade. She doesn't give that out easily. I'd heard. There's something else. Neville lowered his voice, even though they were on a busy street and no one was paying them any attention. The posters. Sirius Black. Harry had seen them. They'd been up in the leaky cauldron when he arrived, pasted near the entrance, the usual grainy prophet photograph of a gaunt man with wild dark hair and hollow eyes. Sirius Black. Dangerous. Do not approach. And at the bottom, in smaller print, the crime, the murder of Peter Pettigrew and 13 muggles, and beneath that, in the careful bureaucratic language the ministry used when it needed people to be afraid without asking too many questions, escaped from Azkaban. Believed to be he who must not be named's most loyal follower. Harry had stood in front of that poster for a long time. The Sariel thing had gone very quiet when he'd looked at it. Not the quiet of disinterest, the quiet of something paying absolute attention. The way a scale goes still the moment before you add the weight that tips it. I saw them, Harry said. He escaped, Neville said. From Azkaban. Gran says it's never happened before. No one can figure out how. No. Harry looked at Neville. What do you think? Neville was quiet for a moment, which wasn't unusual, Neville thought before he spoke, which made him seem slow to people who'd never been around someone who actually considered their words. I think, he said finally, that the ministry doesn't like questions. And they especially don't like questions about Azkaban. Harry nodded slowly. My parents were declared insane. Certified. There was a trial, at least, I've read the transcripts. Bellatrix and the others stood in a courtroom and the ministry did the right thing, that once. Something moved in Neville's jaw. But Gran says there were others. After. People they just took. After you know who fell. There was so much chaos and they just, he stopped. Started again. Sirius Black was never tried. Harry looked at him. How do you know that? Gran keeps old prophets. She's kept every one since 1975. Neville met his eyes, and there was in his gaze something that Harry recognized, the particular steadiness of someone who has carried something terrible for a long time and has made the decision, recently, not to carry it quietly anymore. There's no trial record. I checked twice. He's in Azkaban on the word of Bartemius Crouch Sr., who had emergency powers, who used them about 45 times in 2 months after the war, and not all of those were trials either. Harry was quiet for a moment. Around them, Diagon Alley continued its sunny, commercial bustle. Families with ice cream. A child arguing about the price of a new broom. The cheerful world of the magical Britain that worked, humming along on top of its own foundations without ever looking down. Good summer. Harry said finally. Neville blinked. Then, against everything his face had been doing, he laughed, short and real and surprised. Better than I expected, he said. You. Getting there. Augusta Longbottom materialized at Neville's shoulder with the sudden presence of a very experienced witch who had learned to move when required. Neville. We've Ollivanders and then the magical menagerie and then we are done and I am going to have a cup of tea that hasn't been rushed. She looked at Harry with the sharp, appraising gaze of someone who sorted people quickly and filed them accurately. She'd always been slightly wary of Harry, not unkind, but watchful, with the caution of a woman who'd seen what happened when powerful people got attached to powerful boys. Today she looked at him for a moment longer than usual. Harry Potter, she said. Mrs. Longbottom. You look different, she said. It was the same observation Neville had made, but where Neville had said it with curiosity, she said it with something more complicated, recognition, almost, as if she were identifying a species she'd read about but never expected to encounter. Then she filed it away, wherever Augusta Longbottom filed things, and swept Neville toward Ollivanders. Neville glanced back once. Harry raised a hand. Neville nodded, and there was something in the nod that felt like the beginning of something new, not just 2 Gryffindors who shared a dormitory, but 2 people who had, separately, come to the same conclusion about the world and were starting to realize they might be able to do something about it together. Harry walked on through Diagon Alley, and the morning light was warm on his face, and in his chest the ancient thing that called itself Sariel breathed slow and steady, and watched everything with patient, luminous attention. He bought his books. He bought his supplies. He found a small sandwich shop down a side alley that he'd never noticed before and ate an egg sandwich that was substantially better than anything he'd had all summer. He read the beginning of Intermediate Transfiguration because he'd read everything else already. He watched people. He'd always been good at watching. Living in the Dursley house had made it a survival skill, knowing before Vernon's key hit the lock what kind of evening it was going to be, reading the weather of a room the moment you entered it. He'd brought that skill to Hogwarts and found it was useful in different ways there, useful for Quidditch, for spotting what people weren't saying, for noticing when something was wrong before it fully became wrong. Today he watched Diagon Alley and he felt the skill operating on a level it hadn't before. It was as if someone had cleared a fog he hadn't known was there. He could see the shape of things, not magically, not with any power he could name, just clearly. The anxious family near the bookshop, parents scanning the street for something or someone. The man outside the robes shop who wasn't shopping, who'd been standing in the same spot for 20 minutes, watching the crowd with the particular attention of someone who'd been given a task. 2 children near the ice cream parlor having a fight that had the specific rhythm of the same fight they'd been having for years. And, near the entrance to the alley, pinned beside the Sirius Black poster, a ministry notice. New regulations for the coming school year. Dementors, it said, were being stationed at Hogwarts. For the protection of students, it said. In light of recent security concerns. Harry read it once. Read it again. Dementors. At Hogwarts. Around children. The warm thing in his chest made a sound like the sea before a storm, not loud, barely perceptible, but deep. The sound of something very old becoming very certain about something. He took the notice down. Folded it. Put it in his pocket. He didn't know yet exactly what he was going to do about it. But he knew, with the bone-deep, tide-pulled certainty of the thing in him that remembered everything, that Dementors at a school full of children was wrong in a way that went beyond ministry policy and school regulations and whatever political calculation had produced it. It was wrong in the old sense. The absolute sense. The sense that Sariel understood. He walked back to the leaky cauldron in the August sunshine, and his shadow on the cobblestones was, for just a moment, the wrong shape. Too wide across the shoulders. Extended at the back. Nobody noticed. The world was busy, and looking elsewhere, as it usually was. He noticed, and held it the way you hold a new word you've just learned, turning it over, feeling its weight, beginning, slowly, to understand what it means. The week passed in the way August weeks do when you have nowhere specific to be, slowly at first, then all at once. Harry read and practiced and let Hedwig take him on her schedule, going to sleep when she returned and waking when she left. He ran in the mornings along the Thames because Quidditch had made him understand that physical strength and magical strength were not unrelated. He ate actual meals, which was still something of a novelty. Ron and Hermione arrived 3 days before the train, with the Weasleys in the usual whirlwind of red hair and overlapping conversation. Fred and George immediately began a complex negotiation with Hermione about whether their new product line violated any of the 17 rules she'd preemptively identified before they'd finished describing it. Ron dropped onto the chair across from Harry and looked at him with the squinting assessment of someone who'd known him for 2 years. "You ran away from the Dursleys, didn't you?" "Left," Harry said. Significant semantic difference. "Right, yeah." Ron nodded sagely. "Mum's going to want to, I know. She's already started." "I know." "Is it?" Ron stopped. Tilted his head. Did the same thing Neville had done, the same thing Augusta Longbottom had done, looked at Harry with a slightly unfocused quality, like someone trying to read small print. "You look different, yes. Multiple people have said so. Do you know why?" Harry looked at his friend. Ron was earnest and occasionally obtuse and fundamentally decent in the way that some people are simply built decent, as if the basic materials of their character included a structural honesty that couldn't be removed without the whole thing collapsing. He was also, Harry knew, braver than he gave himself credit for and more perceptive than he usually demonstrated. Working on it, Harry said. Which was the truth. Molly Weasley did, indeed, want to address the matter of Harry's departure from Privet Drive. She did this at dinner, with the determined warmth of a woman who believed that most of the world's problems could be significantly improved by food and a firmly delivered dose of genuine concern. Harry sat through it with patience and ate 3 helpings because the food was genuinely excellent and because he could see that it mattered to her, and things that genuinely mattered to people were, in his current estimation, worth at least that much respect. Arthur Weasley leaned over during a gap in Molly's monologue about responsible use of Flo powder and said, very quietly, "Good for you, son." Harry looked at him. Arthur was looking at the middle distance with the particular carefully cultivated expression of a man who had not said what he had just said. Then he passed the potatoes. Harry passed them on, and felt something in his chest do something that wasn't quite a laugh, warmer than that. The feeling of being around people who were trying, who were good, who were building something worth protecting. He held that feeling carefully. He was going to need it. The night before the train, Harry lay awake in the room he shared with Ron and listened to the burrows settle around him. Ron's even breathing. The garden gnomes doing whatever garden gnomes did at midnight. The distant sound of Molly downstairs, being unable to sleep, being someone who loved so much it physically kept her awake. The seal in his chest was quiet but it wasn't still. It was the quiet of a tide that has pulled all the way back and is preparing to come in. He knew, not from memory, not from any coherent narrative, but from the bone-level certainty of the warm old thing, that this year was different. Not because of Sirius Black, though Sirius Black was part of it. Not because of the Dementors, though the Dementors were part of it. Not because of Voldemort, lurking somewhere in the dark with his diminished but not gone power. This year was different because he was different, and whatever the seal was keeping in was already, inexorably, coming out. The moment in the cupboard had been a crack. It would not be the last one. He could be afraid of that. He examined the option honestly, the way he'd learned to examine things, clearly, without flinching away from what was actually there. He could be afraid of the vastness of what he was beginning to remember, of the difference between being Harry Potter and being whatever Harry Potter also was, of the weight of that second heartbeat, that bell, that name. He was not afraid. He had grown up with very little. He had spent 13 years learning to be enough with whatever he had. And what he had, it turned out, was something ancient and luminous and furious about injustice, and the memory of a choice. He didn't have the whole memory, not yet, but he had the shape of it, a choice made from love rather than obedience, a falling that was also a descent, a shattering that was also, eventually, a seed. He put his hand over his chest, over the heartbeat and the bell, and felt the warmth of it, the steadiness. I know, he thought. I know we're not ready yet. But we're getting there. The warm thing pressed back against his palm like an answer, or a promise, and Harry Potter closed his eyes, and slept, and outside the window of the burrow the summer stars were very bright, and if one of them burned slightly whiter than the others, slightly steadier, like a light that had been there before the constellation was named, well. The night was full of things that people weren't paying attention to. He'd always been one of them. September 1st came the way it always did, sudden and slightly overwhelming, the platform packed and echoing, the Hogwarts Express gleaming red against the smoke, all the noise and movement of a world that had been on pause all summer suddenly resuming at full volume. Harry moved through it with his trunk and his owl and a calm that felt new on him, not the suppressed calm of someone managing anxiety, but the actual calm of someone who knew where they were going and had made peace with it. He found a compartment. Stowed his trunk. Hedwig gave him a look that said she was tolerating the journey but expected excellent mice upon arrival. He watched the platform through the window. Families saying goodbye. First years looking terrified and thrilled in equal measure. He saw Neville saying goodbye to Augusta, a goodbye that involved Augusta gripping his shoulders and saying something with characteristic intensity, and Neville nodding with that new quality in his jaw, that quiet settled determination. He saw, on the platform, pinned to the notice board near the barrier, another Sirius Black poster. And beside it, looking at it, a woman he didn't recognize, ministry robes, a smile that lived on her face like a decoration rather than an expression, the particular quality of someone who enjoys their authority the way other people enjoy dessert. He didn't know her name yet. He would. The train moved, and England scrolled past the window, and Harry sat with his back straight and his hands quiet in his lap and felt, for the first time in 13 years, that he was not on his way to something, that he was not approaching his life from outside it, not arriving at belonging like a guest who knows the visit is temporary. He was simply, completely, in it. In the weight of his own strange and luminous self, in the warm ancient heartbeat beneath his ribs, in the specific September light falling golden through the compartment window and laying itself across his hands, hands that had, last week, in a small dark cupboard in Surrey, held the beginning of something vast. The train moved north, toward the mountains, toward the castle, toward everything that was coming. Harry Potter, who was also Sariel, who was also something that hadn't existed in this world for a very long time, watched the world go by. And waited, with the particular patience of something that has all the time in the world, for what came next. Chapter 2, The Sorting of Souls. The rain started somewhere past Bristol. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that arrived with thunder and the sense of narrative significance. Just the grey, steady, English kind that settled in without announcement and intended to stay. It blurred the windows and made the compartment feel smaller, and the smaller it felt the more the Hogwarts Express seemed to be the whole world, just this carriage, this light, these people, this rhythm of wheels on track. Harry had the compartment to himself for the first hour. He spent it reading, which he would have said was unremarkable, except that what he was reading was not on his school list. He'd found it in a second-hand bin outside Flourish and Blots the day before, tucked between a mildewed potion supplemental and a badly damaged copy of Fantastic Beasts. It was thin and old and had no title on the cover, just a symbol pressed into the leather. 7 lines radiating from a central point, like rays of light, except the lines curved slightly, like feathers. He hadn't been able to put it down. The text was in a language he didn't know, which should have made it unreadable, except that it wasn't unreadable. It was readable the way music is readable, not through the intellect but through something below it. The warm thing in his chest helped, filling in gaps not with translations but with understanding, the way you understand a dream while you're in it. He'd been absorbing it in pieces, and each piece settled into him with the weight of something being returned to its proper place. He understood, reading it, that it was old. Older than Wizarding Britain. Older than the magical tradition that had built Hogwarts and Gringotts and the Ministry. It predated the categorizations, the bureaucracy, the systems. It described a world in which magic was not a talent or a genetic inheritance but a property of reality itself, and in which certain beings existed not to channel that magic but to carry something else. Something the book called din, which his chest translated not as a sound but as a concept, the weight of what is right. The knowledge, not moral, not philosophical, but structural, woven into the fabric of whatever they were, of the difference between what is and what ought to be. The Watchers, the book called them. The Seraphim of Judgment. It did not explain what happened when they fell. The page where that section should have been was missing, torn out, cleanly, long ago. But the ragged edge was there, and the faint impression of ink at the tear, and Harry had been staring at that torn edge when Hermione Granger opened the compartment door. She had her cat under one arm and a stack of books under the other, and she was doing the thing she sometimes did where she was clearly in the middle of several thoughts at once and was navigating the physical world as a secondary priority. She looked up when she registered Harry, opened her mouth, closed it, and then, for the first time in Harry's memory, simply stood there. Hermione Granger rarely simply stood. "Hi," Harry said. "Your eyes," she said. He hadn't looked in a mirror since the cupboard. He'd been avoiding it with the specific, deliberate quality of avoidance that he recognized as itself meaningful. "What about them?" I don't know. They're different." She came in, deposited Crookshanks, sat down, and looked at him with the concentrated focus she normally reserved for genuinely difficult arithmancy problems. The color is the same, but there's something. She stopped. Restarted. It's like looking at a window when the sun is behind it. You're looking at the glass, but there's clearly something bright on the other side. That's very precise. I'm a precise person. She leaned forward slightly. Harry. What happened this summer? How much time do you have? We're 4 hours from Hogsmeade. So he told her. Not everything, not the seal, not the book, not the name that had risen in the dark of the cupboard like a bell. But the broad shape of it, the Dursleys, the cupboard, the lights going out, the shadow on the garden wall. The sensation of something waking up in him that had been there all along, waiting with the patience of something that had learned to wait. She listened the way she did when something genuinely surprised her, completely still, none of her usual annotation, just absolute attention. When he finished she was quiet for a moment, her hand absently on Crookshank's back. The lights on the whole street, she said. Yes. All at once. Yes. And the shadow. Yes. Harry. She said his name with a very particular quality, the quality of someone who has performed a calculation and received an answer that doesn't fit any of the pre-established categories. That's not standard accidental magic. No. Accidental magic is localized. Emotional, usually. It affects the immediate area, the immediate object. It doesn't take out an entire street and then, she paused, project a shadow of something that wasn't physically there. No, he agreed. It doesn't. So what is it? He picked up the old book and held it out. She took it and looked at the cover, the 7-rayed symbol, and her expression went through several phases quickly. He watched professional recognition, scholarly excitement, and something he could only describe as careful awe cross her face in sequence. Where did you get this? Flourish and blots. The second-hand bin. This is not, Harry, this isn't a wizarding text. The symbol is pre-wizarding. The linguistic root structure looks like it predates Latin, which means, she opened it and looked at the first page and made a soft sound. What language is this? I don't know. Can you read it? Yes. She looked at him over the top of the book. Then she looked back at the book. Then at him again. You can read a language you don't know. Apparently. She closed the book very carefully, with the reverence she gave things that mattered. Okay, she said. Okay. We need to. She stopped herself from whatever she'd been about to plan, took a breath, and said something that was, for Hermione, quite remarkable. Tell me what it says. Just, tell me what you've understood so far. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was even more remarkable. Outside the window, England went grey and wet. Crookshanks had migrated to Harry's side of the compartment and was sitting on his knee with the unself-conscious certainty of an animal that had made a decision and didn't feel the need to explain it. Seraphim of judgment, Hermione said when he'd finished, tasting the phrase. Like angels? In the religious sense? Like whatever angels are based on, maybe. The real version. He paused. Or one story of the real version. I don't think the book is claiming to be definitive. But you think it's about you. Something in me thinks it's about me. He put his hand over his chest briefly, the gesture was automatic, the way you touch a bruise to confirm it's still there. There's something here. There has been since I can remember. I thought everyone had it. They don't. She was quiet for a moment. The seal, she said. He hadn't mentioned the word seal, he described the sensation, but not the word. She'd gotten there herself. He shouldn't have been surprised. Something keeping it contained. And the cupboard was, what? Enough pressure that it started to fail? 13 years of pressure, Harry said. Not just the cupboard. All of it. All of them. 13 years of being told I was nothing, and the thing that knew I wasn't nothing finally decided it had listened long enough. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to find every text I can on pre-wizarding magical entities, she said. I want to cross-reference them with the Hogwarts Library's restricted section, because if this is real, and I'm not saying it isn't, I'm saying I want evidence for what I already suspect, then there should be traces in the historical record. Things Wizarding Academia filed under myth because they couldn't explain it. That sounds like you. It is me. She held out the book. He took it. Their fingers overlapped briefly on the spine, and for just a moment, the light in the compartment was very slightly brighter than the gray afternoon warranted, and Hermione Granger looked at her own hand with an expression of complete scientific delight. Then the compartment door opened, and Ron came in with a chocolate frog in each hand, tripped slightly over his own feet, and looked between the two of them with the expression of someone who has walked into a room and can sense the weight of a conversation without being able to identify it. Right, he said carefully. Is this a moment? Am I interrupting a moment? Sit down, Ron, Harry said. I've got chocolate frogs. Then definitely sit down. Ron sat. He offered a frog to Harry, one to Hermione. Hermione took hers with the absent automaticity of someone whose hands were operating while her brain was elsewhere, and looked at Harry with the squinting assessment he'd had on the platform. You still look different, he said. Have you looked in a mirror? I've been avoiding it. Maybe don't avoid it much longer. Just as a friend. Just as a heads up. Noted. Neville arrived an hour later, along with Ginny, who had grown over the summer and acquired, somewhere in the process, a quality she hadn't had in second year, a directness, a steadiness, as if the events of the chamber had burned off something uncertain and left something cleaner. She looked at Harry when she came in and said, simply, "Good," and then sat down next to Hermione and opened a book. "Good?" Harry said. "You look better than last year," Ginny said, without looking up. "Like you know something." "He does," Hermione said. "Don't tell me yet," Ginny said. "I want to get through chapter 3. Neville was eating a sandwich and reading the back of a herbology today with the dedication of someone who found herbology actively exciting, which Harry had always respected. He looked up once, at Harry, with that same quiet nod from Diagon Alley, and Harry nodded back, and that was enough. It was Neville who noticed them first. He'd gone to the corridor to use the bathroom. This was just before the light began to fail, as the train pushed north and the rain intensified, and he came back into the compartment with a different quality in his movement. Quieter. The kind of quiet that Harry recognized as the body automatically conserving itself. "There's a Dementor on the train," he said. The compartment went still. They're supposed to be at Hogsmeade," Hermione said, already reaching for her wand. "For the station perimeter." Dumbledore said, "Well, one of them didn't read the memo," Neville said. He had sat down and was gripping his knee with one hand in a way that wasn't quite trembling. "It's 2 carriages back. Everyone it passes, they're just," he stopped. Harry knew. He'd heard it described. The cold, the despair, the sense of every good thing being removed until all that remained was the worst moments you'd ever lived. He'd heard the description and he'd noted it with the same patient attention he gave to threats, because threats were things you prepared for, not things you waited to surprise you. But what he felt now, as Neville spoke, was not preparation and not fear. What he felt was the warm thing in his chest turned toward the door of the compartment like a compass needle finding north. Not toward safety. Toward the Dementor. It felt, he searched for the word and found it in the old language from the book, a word that meant something like abomination, or more precisely, a thing that is wrong in a way that is not simply dangerous but is an offense against the structure of what is real. The cold hit the compartment before the door opened, a wave of it, sudden and total, the temperature dropping with impossible speed, the windows frosting over in the time it took to breathe. The light in the corridor went flat and gray and wrong. Ron made a sound that he would later deny making. Ginny's knuckles went white on her book. The Dementor came through the door. It was exactly as described and worse than described, the way real things are always worse than descriptions of them, the hovering, robed, handless thing, its face, if it had a face, hidden, its presence a physical force, a wrongness that pressed against the skin and said, in no language, in the language beneath language, "There is nothing good and there never was, and everything you love will be taken and has already been taken, and there is only this, only the end of light, only the cold." Harry heard his mother's voice from a very long distance away. "Not Harry, please, take me, not Harry," he heard it. He held it for a fraction of a second, the way you hold something that hurts because letting go of it would hurt differently. And then the warm thing in his chest, the bell, the Sariel thing that had been waiting patiently and quietly for 13 years, extended itself. Not explosively. Not dramatically. It simply expanded, the way a held breath releases, completely, without resistance, filling the space that was there to be filled. The light that came from Harry was not the light of a Patronus. A Patronus is silver and shaped, summoned from joy like a shield. This was not a shield. This was the thing that shields are pale imitations of, pure and white and edged with that dark that wasn't black, the color of judgment, of the scale tipping, of the moment before the verdict that cannot be appealed. It didn't fill the compartment. It went through the compartment and into the Dementor and past it, and every window on that side of the carriage blazed white simultaneously, and the cold did not gradually recede, it left, all at once, as if it had never been, as if the concept of cold had been temporarily suspended by something with more authority. The Dementor didn't flee. It recoiled, a different thing, a more total thing, the way a shadow recoils from direct sunlight, the way a lie recoils from something that knows. It pulled back through the door and Harry felt it move away down the train, faster and faster, and then off the train entirely, because he could feel it moving the way you feel a sound fading into distance, and then it was gone. The compartment was warm. The windows were clear. Everyone was staring at him. Harry exhaled slowly. The light had retracted, back under the skin, back to the warm steady thing, back to the seal, which he could feel now more clearly than before, more clearly each time it cracked, like becoming acquainted with a door by the sound it makes each time it opens slightly wider. "What," said Ron, "was that?" Harry looked at his hands. His hands were fine. Normal. Just hands. "I pushed it away," he said. "That wasn't a Patronus," Hermione said. She had her wand out, hadn't cast anything, was holding it forgotten at her side while she stared at Harry with that expression, the calculation and wonder expression, the one that meant she was running very fast in a direction she hadn't previously known existed. "I know what a Patronus looks like, I've read the theory extensively." That was not a Patronus. That was, the light, the Dementor's reaction, it didn't just drive it off, it, Harry, that thing flinched from you. "Good," Ginny said. Everyone looked at her. She had not moved from her position, book now lowered to her lap, and she was looking at Harry with a steady quality that was not surprise and was not fear. It was, he thought, recognition, the look of someone who has known in a vague way that something was different about a thing and has now seen the specific shape of that difference. "Dementors feed on happiness," she said. "On hope. On good things. That's what they take." She paused. "Whatever you just did, it isn't a good thing. It's something, bigger. Older. Something the Dementor has probably never encountered before and doesn't have any framework for." She tilted her head. "I think it was afraid." Harry thought about this. "Good," he said, deliberately echoing her, and the corner of her mouth turned up. Neville had been quiet through all of this. Now he said, low and even, "My parents are in St. Mungo's because of creatures like that. Specifically because of what those things did to their minds when they were in Azkaban. And you just made one flee." He wasn't asking a question. He wasn't expressing wonder. He was saying something precise and deliberate, marking a fact, filing it in the same place he'd filed the trial records and the missing years and his grandmother's old copies of the Prophet. "Yeah," Harry said. "I know." Neville nodded. Picked up his herbology magazine. Turned a page with the measured calm of someone who has just added a piece to a picture he's been building for a long time and is not surprised by where it fits. Professor Lupin appeared 20 minutes later, already apologizing before he'd fully opened the door, a tallish man with a threadbare quality to his robes and his whole person, the look of someone who was used to having less than he needed and had made an accommodation with it. He was carrying a large bar of chocolate that he was already breaking into pieces, and his eyes went around the compartment once with the quick, practiced assessment of someone who had spent time reading rooms. They landed on Harry and stayed there. He said nothing for a moment. Just looked, with an expression Harry couldn't fully categorize, something between relief and grief and a complicated something else that lived at the back of his eyes where the professional composure didn't quite reach. "Did it enter the compartment?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. "And you're all," he was still looking at Harry. "You drove it off?" "Yes." Lupin handed out chocolate with the systematic efficiency of someone who had done this before. He gave Harry a larger piece than anyone else, and when Harry raised an eyebrow at this, Lupin said quietly, "Humor me," and there was something in his voice, not authority, not instruction, but something like please wrapped in professional composure, that made Harry take the chocolate without comment. He ate it. It was very good chocolate, the kind that tasted like it was doing something more than just tasting good, and the warmth that spread from it was real, though Harry's warmth came from elsewhere and hadn't left. "I'll speak to the driver," Lupin said. "The Dementors are not supposed to board the train." He paused at the door. Looked back. Found Harry's eyes again with that complicated expression. "Get some rest if you can. We'll be at Hogsmeade in 2 hours." He left. "He knew something," Hermione said immediately. "He knew a lot of things," Harry agreed. "He looked at you the way people look at something they were told to expect." She turned this over. "Who would have told him?" "About the Dementor, she stopped. "Dumbledore." "Probably." Harry ate another piece of chocolate. "Dumbledore knows most things before they happen. It's one of his more complicated qualities." "Do you think he knows?" "About you?" Harry thought about the old headmaster, the man who had placed him with the Dursleys, who sent him letters every year that managed to be warm and completely uninformative simultaneously, who moved people around a chessboard with such gentle care that the chess pieces often didn't realize they were being moved. Dumbledore, who had been there the night his parents died. Who had written the letter that went with the baby in the bundle on the doorstep. "I think," Harry said carefully, "that Dumbledore suspects there's something unusual about me. I think he's known for a while. And I think he's filed it in whatever category lets him continue to plan around me without having to revise the plan." "That's a very precise criticism," Hermione said. "I've had 13 years to observe the dynamic." Outside, the rain continued. Inside, the compartment was warm, and the 5 of them, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, sat in the kind of silence that is not empty but full, the kind that settles between people who have been through something together and are still in the process of understanding what it was. Hogsmeade Station in the rain was torches and steam and the enormous dark bulk of the mountains beyond the platform. The first years were shrieking about the boats. The older students moved with the efficient speed of people who knew what was coming and were dressed insufficiently for it. Harry stood on the platform and let the rain hit him and looked up at the castle on the hill. He always forgot, over summer, the exact quality of it, the way Hogwarts looked at night, all towers and lit windows and the sense of something ancient watching back. He felt it watching him now. Or felt something in it watching him. Something in the stones. "You've done it again," Ron said beside him, pulling his robes tighter against the rain. "Done what?" "The face. The I am having a significant moment and cannot be interrupted face. I'm just looking at the castle." "You're looking at it like you're remembering it." Harry looked at Ron. Ron, who had sat through the Dementor incident with white knuckles and had nevertheless done nothing so ordinary as faint, who had accepted chocolate with good grace, who had looked at Harry with the careful neutrality of someone who was deciding, actively, not to be frightened of his best friend. "Ron," Harry said. "Whatever happens this year, mate," Ron said, with the precise amount of briskness required to deflect sentiment without dismissing it. I sat next to you on our first train ride when you didn't know what a chocolate frog was. I think I can handle whatever comes next. He walked toward the carriages. Harry followed, and as he passed through the gate from the platform, the Thestrals, visible to him, had been since second year, a fact he'd never particularly examined until this moment, turned their heads toward him. All of them. Every one. And then, slowly, in a gesture he'd never seen Thestrals make before, they lowered them. He walked past them into the carriages and didn't mention it, and nobody else had seen, and the castle blazed with warm light on the hill above, and the rain fell over everything equally, the way it does. The great hall was everything it was supposed to be, levitating candles, for long tables, the enchanted ceiling showing the real sky above, rain, heavy, starless, and the entire assembled population of Hogwarts doing what assembled populations do when released from carriages, talking over each other at maximum volume about things of critical personal importance. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table and ate the pre-feast bread rolls that were always somehow the best bread he had in any given month and watched the hall. Watched Dumbledore at the high table, looking benevolently over everything from behind his half-moon glasses. Watched the new staff additions, Lupin at one end, talking with a calm familiarity that suggested he'd been here before, a small toad-like woman in the center who hadn't been here before, pink cardigan, fixed smile, the quality of someone who had arrived and was already categorizing everything as subordinate. Hermione followed his gaze. Dolores Umbridge, she said quietly. Ministry. She was at the Wisengamot hearing for the Dementor restrictions last spring. Voted for increased deployment. Harry looked at her. How do you know that? I read the ministry's public session records over the summer. She said this as if it were completely ordinary. It was, for her, completely ordinary. She's been pushing for expanded ministry influence over Hogwarts for 3 years. That she's here in a staff capacity is, she paused. Not subtle. No. They're watching the school. She picked up her pumpkin juice. Because of you, partly. After the chamber. The way you dealt with the basilisk was, the ministry's official categorization is, extraordinary student performance, but unofficially, they don't know what to do with me. They don't know what to do with something they can't regulate. She said it precisely. It's not personal. They can't regulate love, or genuine courage, or things that operate outside the framework they've built. So they ignore those things, or they try to control them, or they, well. She glanced at the pink cardigan woman. Or they appoint oversight. The first years came in, small and damp and wide-eyed, trailing Professor McGonagall, who moved through the hall with the absolute authority of someone who has long since made peace with the fact that she is the most competent person in most rooms she enters. The sorting began, and Harry watched the sorting hat, which he'd always found more interesting than its novelty item reputation suggested. The hat saw something in people. He'd always suspected it saw more than it said. When it came to a nervous, small-faced boy named Aldrich Voss, the hat paused for a noticeably long time before saying Hufflepuff with slightly more gravity than the situation seemed to require. Harry watched Aldrich Voss walk to the Hufflepuff table and felt the warm thing in his chest note something, not threat, not danger, just, noted. Something filed. He wasn't sure what to do with that yet. Dumbledore stood after the last student was sorted and gave his usual beginning-of-term speech, which Harry had learned to listen to in translation. The important things were always in the subordinate clauses, the qualifications, the things said in the warm tone that made them easy to slide past. This year the important thing was sandwiched between announcements about the forest being off-limits and Mr. Filch's updated list of forbidden items, the Dementors, their presence, the grounds. Necessary. Regrettable. In the interest of safety. Harry ate a piece of bread and didn't look up. For the protection of students, it said. In light of recent security concerns. He'd read it on the ministry notice. He'd folded it and put it in his pocket. He still had it. After dinner, roast and vegetables and a pudding that deserved more attention than the company allowed, Harry found himself standing at one end of the Gryffindor table while the hall emptied around him. Hermione had gone ahead with Neville, already planning a library strategy with the specific intensity of two people who had decided to understand something and intended to actually do it. Ron was in deep strategic negotiation with Fred and George about something that definitely wasn't school-related. Ginny had been swept up by her friends. Harry stood at the table and looked up at the enchanted ceiling. The rain was still coming down, but through it, directly above the center of the Great Hall, directly above where Harry was standing, there was a break in the cloud. A single gap, circular, through which 3 stars were visible. He looked at them for a moment. I remember this place, he thought. And the thought arrived not with the wistful quality of nostalgia but with the calm, certain quality of I have been here and I will be here, the knowledge of something that predates the castle and will outlast it, something that looked at these mountains before they were named. You know, said a voice beside him, most people look up at the ceiling because of the charm. He turned. A girl was standing slightly down the table from him, not in his year, possibly 4th, with dark skin and bright eyes and the quality of someone who said exactly what she meant because she found any other approach inefficient. He didn't know her well, she was in Ravenclaw, which meant their paths crossed only in classes and in the incidental geography of a school full of people. Ptolemy Cho, she said, and she extended her hand in a way that was simultaneously formal and completely unself-conscious, as if she'd decided that shaking hands was the most sensible greeting and the social awkwardness around it was other people's problem. That's an unusual first name, Harry said. My mother's an astronomer. She said it without apology. You're Harry Potter. You drove a Dementor off the train this afternoon. 3 different people in my carriage reported it. She wasn't accusing him of anything, she was presenting a data point. It wasn't a Patronus. No. I've been studying Patronus theory since 3rd year. It requires a specific kind of concentrated positive emotion. She looked at him with the direct assessment of a Ravenclaw who had learned that looking at things clearly was more useful than looking at them politely. What you did didn't require that. No, Harry agreed. What did it require? He considered the question. It deserved an honest answer because it was an honest question and because she'd asked it without any angle he could detect, no fear, no agenda, no attempt to categorize him into something manageable. Just, what is this thing I've observed, how does it work? Something I haven't fully understood yet, he said. But something that finds Dementors offensive. In the old sense. Like a fundamental violation. She absorbed this. That's interesting, she said, with the specific intonation that means I will be thinking about this for some time. Ptolemy, he said. Why were you watching the ceiling? She looked back up. Found the gap in the clouds, the 3 stars. I always do, at the start of term. I like to see which stars are visible. You can tell a lot about what a year is going to be like from the first stars of September. She paused. That cluster directly above, do you know it? He looked at it. The warm thing in his chest did something quiet. No, he said. The Arabs called it al-Nazik, she said. The arranger. The one who puts things in their proper order. She looked at him sidelong. Appropriate, given the company. She picked up her bag from the bench and walked away toward the Ravenclaw table's direction, unhurried and unsurprised by any of it, and Harry watched her go with the feeling of a conversation that had been more precise than it appeared. He looked back at the stars. Al-Nazik. The arranger. The one who puts things in their proper order. He breathed in the great hall's warmth, candles, food, centuries of students, the distant smell of the grounds coming in through the high windows, and he felt the seal in his chest press against its own edges, not urgently but steadily, like a tide coming in, and he thought, yes. That's what this is. Putting things in their proper order. Harry, said Hermione from the doorway, her head around the door, are you having another significant moment? Because Neville found a reference in the Hogwarts library catalogue to something called the Codex of Watchers, and we need you to come and decide if you think it's worth the 3-week wait for a restricted section pass or if we should go another route. Is another route a euphemism? It is a euphemism, yes. He picked up his bag. Followed her out of the great hall, through the doorway, into the torchlit corridors of Hogwarts, where the stones were very old and something in them remembered, even if nobody asked them what. Behind him, through the high windows, the gap in the clouds closed over. The stars disappeared. But they'd been there. And he'd seen them. And Sariel, behind his ribs, in the warm unshakable center of him, noted this with the quiet satisfaction of something that has been in the dark for a long time and has remembered, fully, finally, irrevocably, that it does not belong there. Chapter 3, The Watcher remembers the castle had a basement that wasn't on any map. Harry had found this out not through exploration or accident but because at 2 in the morning on the 4th night of term, something in his chest had simply pointed. The way a compass points, not asking permission, not offering explanation. Just, this direction. Now. He'd learned, in the weeks since the cupboard, to trust that pointing. He'd followed it through corridors that he knew and corridors that he didn't, down staircases that moved cooperatively for once, as if they'd been waiting for this particular errand. Past the first basement level, past the dungeons, past the place where the dungeon stopped and the mountain underneath the castle began. Into stone that was older than the school, older than the name Hogwarts, older than Salazar Slytherin's particular architectural opinions, older than anyone who had ever walked its corridors. The passage ended at a door. Not a dramatic door. Not iron-banded or carved with warnings or guarded by anything. Just a door of very old pale wood, with no handle, no lock, no visible means of opening. There was a symbol carved into it at eye height, 7 lines radiating from a center point, curving slightly at the ends. The same symbol as the cover of his book. Harry stood in front of it for a moment, in the dark, with only the faint silver-white glow of his own skin to see by, a thing that happened sometimes now, when the seal was thin, when the Sariel thing was paying close attention. It wasn't dramatic. Just enough light to see by, like being near a banked fire. He put his palm flat against the symbol. The door opened. The room on the other side was not large. It was circular and low-ceilinged and made of the same old stone as the passage, and it had the quality of a place that had been sealed and preserved, no dust, no cobwebs, the air still and cool but not dead. In the center of the room was a mirror. Not the mirror of Eriste. Harry had spent enough time in front of that particular piece of cursed furniture to know what it felt like from across a room. This was different. The frame was tarnished silver, simply made, without decoration except for a single line of text carved along the top edge in the old language from his book. He was close enough to read it before he fully registered that he was walking toward it. What you were, you are. What you are, you will become. He looked into it. His reflection looked back. For a moment, exactly a moment, it was just him, just Harry, messy hair and green eyes and the Gryffindor pajamas he'd pulled on in the dark and the particular quality of a 13-year-old standing in an ancient room in the middle of the night. Just a boy. Then the mirror showed him something else. It wasn't a vision in the dramatic sense. There was no soundtrack, no sweeping light, no sense of being pulled through time. It was more like, remembering. The specific texture of remembering something your body knew before your mind did, like how to swim, or ride a bike, or recognize the smell of a place you were very young in. He was vast. That was the first and most total impression, not large in the physical sense but vast in the way that concepts are vast, the way justice is vast, the way grief is vast. He existed at a scale that didn't have a spatial dimension because space was something that existed within him, not the other way around. He was one of 7. He knew the others, not as names or faces but as presences, as signatures, the way you know the voices of people you've lived alongside for longer than you can measure. They were the Watchers. Not watchers in the sense of observers but in the sense of holders of the weight, the beings whose function was to carry Din, the structural knowledge of what was right, and to stand between the light and the dark not as warriors but as scales. He saw, felt, the world below. The small, bright, breakable thing of it. Creatures of such brief and extraordinary intensity, burning through their lives with the specific courage of beings who knew they were temporary. He had watched them for a long time. He had held the line between watching and descending because the law of his nature said, do not interfere. Hold the weight. Do not tip the scale. Then he'd seen something he couldn't hold at the weight and balance level. He searched for it in the memory and found it, not one moment but an accumulation of moments, a slow filling of a vessel, centuries of watching suffering that could have been prevented, watching cruelty that had no counterweight, watching the small bright creatures burn out in darkness when they should have burned out in light. The law said, do not interfere. And Sariel had looked at the law, and looked at the world below, and thought, with the full weight of what he was, with the totality of a being whose function was to know the difference between what is and what ought to be, that the law, in this instance, was wrong. Not strategically wrong. Not wrong because of consequences or because of what a different outcome would produce. Wrong. In the absolute sense. The way a scale is wrong when both pans are empty and somebody is starving. He'd fallen not because he was cast out. He'd fallen because he'd chosen. Because the only way to intervene in the world below was to become part of it, and the only way to become part of it was to give up the vastness, the scale, the eternal perspective, and compress himself into something brief and bright and breakable. He'd done it willingly. He remembered the moment of compression, the shattering of the wings, not as punishment but as necessity, as the physics of the thing, the way a seed must break open before it grows. 12,000 years of accumulated perspective and power and Din compressed into something small enough to fit inside a human soul. The sensation of it was not pain exactly, it was the most complete thing he had ever experienced, the willing reduction of everything into almost nothing, the trust that almost nothing could become, in time, enough. He'd become many things over many lifetimes. He didn't have all the memories, most were sealed with the wings, preserved in the compression, waiting. But he had the shape of the truth of it, he had chosen suffering, each time, in bodies that burned briefly in the dark, because that was the only form the intervention could take. You could not tip the scale from outside the system. You had to be part of it. You had to weigh something yourself before you could rebalance anything. And now, this body, this life, this name, Harry Potter, this was not simply another brief candle. Something in the long, patient plan of what he'd set in motion when he fell had arrived at a point. The seal was breaking not because of external pressure but because the vessel had matured enough to hold what it contained. The cupboard, the Dursleys, 13 years of being told you were nothing, that had been the final compression, the last shaping, the forge that made the metal specific enough to cut. He hadn't been being punished. He'd been being made. The mirror showed him his wings. They weren't physical in the memory the way he'd need to make them physical here, but their shape was there, 12 feathered spans of silver-white light, each feather a separate piece of structured din, of weight and knowing. And at the tips, where in ordinary light things simply ended, the darkness that wasn't black, the color of the moment of judgment, of the sentence rendered, of the thing that cannot be undone and should not be undone because it is correct. He stood in front of the mirror and looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at his own face again, just Harry's face, just the boy, just the green eyes that were apparently slightly wrong now, slightly too bright, and he felt, for the first time, no gap between them. Not Sariel and Harry, not the ancient thing and the boy. Just one person who contained a very long history and was standing in a room at 2 in the morning in Hogwarts, Scotland, with a great deal of work to do. Right, he said, to his own reflection. His voice was steady. Let's get on with it, then. He sat in the room for another hour, not looking in the mirror again but sitting with his back against the wall and letting the memories settle. They didn't all come at once, they came the way memories do, in fragments and associations, one thing connecting to another. He didn't fight it and he didn't rush it. He just sat and let himself be filled, the way the room had been filled with still, preserved air. When he walked back up through the castle, the sky outside the windows was beginning to lighten at the edge, that thin grey-blue that is not yet dawn but has decided to stop being night. He moved through the corridors with the easy quiet of someone who belongs somewhere, and the castle moved with him, staircases settling, paintings turning in their frames with mild interest, the portrait of Dilys Derwent on the second floor looking at him over her spectacles with an expression of someone who is not surprised but has been waiting to not be surprised. "About time," she said. Harry looked at her. "You know what I am." "I've been on this wall for 200 years, she said tartly. "I've seen a great deal." "You have the quality. I noticed it on the 1st of September. The Thestrals noticed it before I did, which is either humbling or appropriate depending on how you look at it." "What quality?" She folded her hands. "The sense that you are looking at something that has been here before the thing it's standing in." She paused. "Also your eyes do something peculiar in the dark." "So I've been told." "Dumbledore hasn't noticed yet," she said. "Or he's noticed and is deciding what to do about it, which with Albus is often the same thing as not having noticed." Her painted mouth pressed briefly together. "Be careful with him. Not because he's dangerous to you, I don't think he is, but because he will try to make you part of his understanding of things, and you are considerably larger than his understanding of things." Harry looked at her with attention. "You're a portrait," he said. "Charmed by observation," she said drily. "What I mean is, you can only tell me things you knew when you were alive, and things you've seen from this wall. You can't. I can tell you that the Codex of Watchers is not in the restricted section," she said, with the air of someone who has been waiting to deploy this information. "It was in the restricted section until 1952, when Headmaster Dip-Pet had it moved. He didn't have it destroyed because he didn't believe in destroying books, which was his one admirable quality. He had it placed in the sub-level archive. The room marked, decommissioned instruments." Harry stared at her. "Third door on the left past where you've just come from," she said. "You're welcome." She picked up her painted book, adjusted her spectacles, and returned to ignoring him with great dignity. He told Hermione in the morning, between bites of toast and under the cover of the Great Hall's breakfast noise. She listened with her book open in front of her as camouflage and her eyes very still with the quality of deep processing. "The sub-level archive," she said. "Third door past the mirror room. According to a portrait of Dilys Derwent. Portrait testimony is actually considered reliable in magical academia," she said absently. "The enchantment preserves, Hermione." "Right, yes. The important part." She turned a page of her decoy book without reading it. "Harry. The memory in the mirror. You said you chose to fall." "Yes. You chose to compress yourself into human form. Voluntarily. To intervene." "Yes. And the seal, the thing keeping the memories and the power contained, it's breaking because you're ready. Not because something broke it." "Not exactly. The pressure helped. The Dursleys, all of it, it shaped the vessel. But the seal was always going to open from the inside." He ate some toast. "It was designed to." She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he could see her doing what she did with things that were very large, not avoiding them, but finding the right scale to examine them at, getting the perspective right before she responded. "What do you remember about why? The specific why? Why you chose to come back here, now?" Harry looked at the table. "Injustice," he said. "The same injustice. It's why I fell the first time, watching suffering that could be prevented and choosing to do something rather than hold the line. And it's," he paused. Felt his way through it. "Whatever I am remembers that there are people in Azkaban who were never tried. It remembers dementors feeding on human souls because a government decided the most efficient way to punish criminals was to give monsters unlimited access to them. It remembers," he stopped. "Neville's parents," Hermione said quietly. "Among others." "Yes." She closed her actual book, the decoy one had already been closed, and looked at him with the directness she reserved for things that mattered. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to do what I came back to do," Harry said simply. "When I'm ready. When I understand enough. When I have enough of myself back. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Harry said, "I'm going to get to class on time, because McGonagall doesn't care what divine origin I have." Hermione laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and the sound of it was bright in the morning noise of the great hall, and for a moment things were just normal, just breakfast, just two friends laughing, and Harry held that too, because the warm ancient thing in him had always known that the small moments were not less than the vast ones. They were the point of the vast ones. Defense against the dark arts with Lupin was everything Augusta Longbottom's assessment had promised and several things it hadn't. He arrived 3 minutes before class, which was different from most teachers who swept in at the bell or slightly after it in a way designed to communicate authority. He arrived early, rearranged the furniture slightly, desks pushed back, more space in the center, and was writing on the board when students filtered in. He wrote nothing dramatic. Just, "What is fear, and what is fear useful for?" He taught the Boggart lesson that day. Harry had read about it, the concept was theoretically interesting. The class was genuinely good, the kind of lesson that was designed around doing rather than absorbing, with the quick progression from observation to participation that the best teachers managed. Neville went first and produced Vernon Dursley in Neville's grandmother's clothes, which was both genuinely funny and, to Harry's eye, a small act of private courage, Neville choosing that image over the one everyone in the room could have predicted. When it came to Harry's turn, Lupin stepped in front of him. The move was smooth and deliberate. Not pointed, he didn't make a thing of it, just redirected the exercise with the easy authority of someone changing a conversation's direction. "Let's see, Seamus, why don't you?" and the lesson moved on. Afterward, as the class filed out, Lupin said, "Harry." A moment. Harry stayed. He sat on the edge of one of the pushed-back desks and waited while Lupin tidied the room with small, efficient wand movements, putting the furniture back. "I owe you an explanation," Lupin said, without preamble, which Harry appreciated. "You blocked my turn with the Boggart." "Yes." "Why?" Lupin was quiet for a moment. He put a chair back in its place and looked at the board, where "What is fear, and what is fear useful for?" was still written. "I was afraid," he said, "that it wouldn't show you Voldemort. That it would show you something else, and that the class wasn't ready for whatever that would be." He turned. "I've been watching you since the train." "I know. You know what I'm watching for." "You knew my father," Harry said. It was a guess, a very informed one, from the specific quality of the grief at the back of Lupin's eyes, but a guess. The slight flinch confirmed it. "And something about me reminded you of him, and then something else about me confused that assessment." Lupin sat down in the teacher's chair. He had the look of someone choosing honesty over comfort. "Remus Lupin. James Potter and I were at school together. He and Sirius and I, and Peter, were friends." He said the last name with a specific quality, factual, even, with something underneath it that was not quite grief and not quite anger but lived in the same neighborhood. "When you drove the Dementor off the train, I was, expecting a Patronus. What you did was not a Patronus. And before you tell me you don't know what it was, I want you to know that I've seen a great many things in 35 years, and I don't know what it was either." Harry looked at him. Lupin was tired, not the casual tired of too much work, but the deep tired of someone carrying something heavy for a long time and having learned to carry it so well it didn't show except in certain kinds of light. He was decent. Harry could feel that the way he could feel Neville's grief or Hermione's care, not magic, exactly, just the warm thing reading people at the level below the surface. "Sirius Black," Harry said. "You said Peter with a specific voice." The careful composure didn't break, exactly. It shifted. "Yes." "What did Peter do?" Silence. The classroom was very still. Outside the windows, the September grounds rolled away toward the forest, ordinary and sunlit. That, Lupin said carefully, is a very long story that I am not certain I'm the right person to tell. Not yet. He looked at Harry with the tired eyes and the back of them grief. What I can tell you is that I don't believe Sirius Black is what the Ministry says he is. Harry had known this. The Sariel thing had known it since the first poster in the leaky cauldron, that instinctive, weight of the scale sense of a narrative that doesn't balance. But hearing it said aloud by someone who had been there, who knew the people, who had spent 12 years carrying the specific grief of whatever the truth actually was, then who is he? Harry said. A man who was in the wrong place, Lupin said quietly, when someone else made the worst choice in the history of the people I loved. He stood. It was a gesture of closing, not rejection, but limits, the limits of what he could say in a classroom on a Tuesday morning without the structural support of the full story. I'm telling you this because you will come to your own conclusions regardless of what I say, and I'd rather you had one thread of the truth than none. Harry stood too. Looked at him with the clear-eyed assessment that was becoming habitual. You're going to tell me the rest. Eventually. Yes, Lupin said. When I've decided how. Fair enough. Harry picked up his bag. At the door he stopped. Professor Lupin. The Boggart, what did you think it would show me, if not Voldemort? A pause. Then, I wasn't sure. Something vast. Something the class would have had no context for. You might have been right, Harry said. And walked out into the corridor. The Codex of Watchers was exactly where Dilly's Derwent had said it would be. The sub-level archive was not a room you were supposed to find accidentally, which was why it was behind an unmarked door that responded to a question rather than a password, not what's the password but what do you need this for, and the door apparently evaluated the answer because when Hermione said, precisely, to understand the nature of a being who requires understanding in order to be properly supported, it opened without argument. Harry, beside her, said, that was impressive. It asked a question, she said. I answered it honestly. The archive was floor-to-ceiling shelves in a space that shouldn't have fit into the available architecture, the way Hogwarts occasionally did spatial things that violated reasonable expectations. Old books, boxes of decommissioned instruments that ticked and shifted faintly in the dark, rolled parchments in labeled cases, jars of things that were better left in jars. The codex was on the third shelf from the floor, between a cracked astrolabe and what appeared to be a bottled argument. It was larger than Harry's book, leather-bound, thick, with the same 7-rayed symbol on the cover but larger, more detailed, with small notation in the gaps between the rays that resolved, as Harry looked at it, into individual names. 7 names. He found his without looking for it. Third from the top, at the end of one of the rays. Sariel. He took the book to the reading table in the center of the room and opened it, and Hermione sat beside him, and they read together, Harry translating as he went, Hermione writing notes with the automatic efficiency of someone who had learned that understanding requires documentation. The codex was comprehensive in the way that texts written by beings of vast age tend to be. It assumed familiarity with context and moved in spirals rather than straight lines, returning to ideas with new layers rather than building linear arguments. But the core of it was clear, the seraphim of judgment, the Watchers, were not angels in the religious sense, not servants of a divine authority. They were more fundamental than that, beings whose nature was the apprehension of correctness, the ability to perceive the structure of what ought to be and to act as the mechanism by which the world corrected itself. Not by force, except as a last resort. Primarily by presence, by being what they were in a place where something was wrong, the way the presence of light in a room doesn't force darkness to leave but simply makes it impossible for darkness to remain. The fall was described in clinical, architectural terms, a willing descent, a compression of nature, a sealing of power for the purpose of inhabiting a mortal form without destroying it. The seal would open gradually, as the vessel developed and the mortal life created the specific conditions, not always suffering, though often, that would temper the container for what it held. It described the wings. Not sentimentally, functionally. The wings were not decorative, they were the physical manifestation of the din, the judgment weight, in a form that the material world could interface with. Silver-white for the active face, the apprehension of what is right. Dark-edged for the functional face, the rendering of what must be corrected. When fully manifest, they were not merely large, they were jurisdictional. Their presence in a space was a claim, this place is now subject to the weight of what is correct. Hermione read over his shoulder, following his translation. At this point she put down her quill and said, jurisdictional. Yes. Your wings are jurisdictional. Apparently. So when they're out, the area they cover is, under your authority, in some fundamental sense. Not authority in the human political sense. He thought about it. More like, the authority of a correct measurement. When something is correctly weighed, the result isn't an opinion. It's just true. She was quiet, running her finger along a line of text. It says here that Dementors, it doesn't use that word, it says the devourers of the unredeemable light, which is more accurate, honestly. Which cannot exist in the jurisdictional space of a fully manifest seraph because their function is the consumption of what ought to be, and that is structurally incompatible with the presence of something that is what ought to be. She looked up. That's why the one on the train reacted the way it did. You're not just something it can't feed on. You're something that negates its existence at a foundational level. Yes. Harry turned a page. And Azkaban is full of them. The words landed in the quiet of the archive room without drama, without escalation, just with the simple weight of a fact being named. Hermione's hand stilled on her notes. Azkaban, she said. An entire island fortress staffed by Dementors, Harry said. Full of people whose souls are being consumed. Some of whom were never tried. He looked at the codex, at the word that appeared several times in the text he was reading, a word that his chest translated not as justice but as something that English didn't have a single word for, the act of restoring balance after it has been wrongly disturbed, which is not the same as punishment and is not the same as mercy but is the thing that contains both of them. Hermione looked at him. Harry. I know. She stopped. Restarted. That's a fortress run by the Ministry of Magic. It's guarded by creatures that even most adult wizards can barely manage. It contains, they say it contains some of the most dangerous criminals in Wizarding Britain. And some people who were never tried, Harry said. Including Sirius Black, who Lupin believes is innocent. Including, Hermione, how many people do you think are in there on Bartemius Crouch's emergency wartime certifications that were never reviewed? She knew the answer. He could see that she knew it. She'd read the records, she'd been thinking about this since Diagon Alley. Dozens, she said quietly. At least. Harry closed the codex. I'm not going there tomorrow. I'm not going there this week. I need to understand more, remember more, be more ready than I am right now. He looked at her steadily. But I am going. That's not a plan, it's just true. The way the result of a correct measurement is true. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, I know, with a tone that meant, I've known this was coming since the compartment on the train, possibly since Diagon Alley, possibly since September 1st when I saw the quality of the light in the great hall around you. Are you afraid? He said. Not of him, he didn't mean that. Of what was coming, of the scale of it, of the collision course between a 13-year-old and the entire apparatus of magical Britain's justice system. Terrified, she said immediately. Also entirely certain it's right. Both at once. She picked up her quill. I'm going to need to copy out several sections of this codex before we return it. We don't need to return it. Harry, it's a library book. It's a book that's been in a locked archive since 1952 that was apparently placed here by someone who didn't want it found. I think the standard borrowing rules, we return it, she said firmly, after I've made copies of the relevant sections, because I am not becoming the sort of person who doesn't return library books regardless of the cosmic significance of the circumstances. She had already opened her note-taking parchment again. It makes me feel better, honestly. Some things should still be normal. Harry looked at her, this extraordinary person with her extraordinary mind, insisting on returning a library book in the middle of a revelation about divine beings and the imminent dismantling of an unjust prison, because some things should still be normal, and felt the ancient warm thing in his chest do something that wasn't judgment and wasn't weight and wasn't dim. Just gratitude. Enormous and particular. Okay, he said. We return it. 3 floors above them, in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, Neville Longbottom was sitting with his back against the wall and a very old copy of the Prophet open in his lap, and he was reading the same article he'd read 17 times, the one from November 1981 that reported on a series of arrests under emergency warrant, the names listed in small print at the bottom of a page, among them Sirius Black, among them several others, with no mention of trial, no mention of evidence, just the blunt institutional language of a system that had decided efficiency was more important than accuracy. He read it again. Folded it. Put it back in his bag. Stood up. His face was very still, the way faces get when they've arrived somewhere past the point of the particular emotion and are operating in the clear air on the other side of it. He walked to class. That night, in the Gryffindor common room, Harry sat in front of the fire with Crookshanks in his lap. The cat had fully adopted him now, apparently finding Harry's specific kind of warmth preferable to all other available warmth, and Neville sat on the other side of the fire, and they didn't talk for a while. Sometimes that was the right thing. Then Neville said, without looking up from his herbology textbook, "Are you going to do something about Azkaban?" Harry looked at him across the fire. Yes. Neville turned a page. Good, he said. Neville. Harry waited until Neville looked at him. Your parents. I can't promise what I'll find. Or what state, I know, Neville said. The simplicity of it was complete, not resignation, not suppressed hope, just the flat honest accounting of someone who has looked at the reality of a thing until they can see it clearly. I've known since I was 4 that my parents aren't coming back the way they were. That's Bellatrix Lestrange's work, not Azkaban's, and he paused. She's already in there. She's already living in what she made for other people. His jaw did the thing. But there are others. Others who shouldn't be there at all. Yes. Then that's what matters. He looked back at his book. Then, for what it's worth, Harry. Whatever you are. He gestured vaguely, a gesture that encompassed the book and the mirror and the Dementor on the train and the lights going out in Surrey and all of it. I'm glad you're on this side of it. Harry looked at him for a moment. Me too, he said. Crookshanks purred against his knee, and the fire crackled, and the common room hummed around them with the ordinary life of students, homework and arguments and gossip and laughter, and beneath it, in the deep old stone of the castle, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not yet. But the door in the sub-basement was unlocked, and the mirror had shown what it had to show, and somewhere in Harry's chest the seal was thinner than it had ever been, and the bell rang slow and steady with the patience of something that has waited long enough and has decided, finally, that it is done waiting. Outside, the wind moved off the black lake, and the castle's flags snapped in it, and the torches burned, and the night was very clear, and the stars, Alnazic, the arranger, the one who puts things in their proper order, burned steady and bright above the mountains. And in Azkaban, many miles to the north, in a cell at the end of a long dark corridor, a man with hollow eyes and wild hair was sitting with his back against the cold stone wall when, for no reason he could explain, he felt something. Not warmth, not exactly. The Dementors took warmth the way they took everything else. But something. A quality. The memory of warmth. The shape of warmth, like a letter in a language he'd almost forgotten. He pressed his hand against the wall and felt it thrumming, faintly, the way walls feel in old buildings when there's something moving through the foundations. Something coming. Not yet. But coming. Sirius Black closed his eyes, and for the first time in 12 years, the darkness behind them was not entirely empty. Chapter 4, Wings over the Quidditch pitch. The morning of the match was cold and bright and smelled like mud and something burning, which turned out to be Seamus attempting to waterproof his Gryffindor scarf with a charm he'd read about in the back of an unrelated textbook. The charm had not waterproofed the scarf. It had, however, given it opinions about where it wanted to be, and it was currently making for the portrait hole with the purposeful energy of something that had been cooped up long enough. Seamus, Neville said, not looking up from his breakfast. I see it, the scarf made it 3 feet past the portrait hole before Dean tackled it. Harry ate his porridge and watched the Gryffindor table do what it did on match mornings, a specific cocktail of noise and nervous energy and the sort of laughter that lives right next to genuine fear. Across the hall, the Slytherin table was doing the same thing but with more deliberate composure, the particular performance of a house that had decided visible anxiety was beneath it. Marcus Flint was eating with the focused intensity of someone planning a military campaign. Wood appeared at Harry's elbow. Oliver Wood, 6th year, captain, a person who experienced Quidditch the way other people experienced religion. Harry. How are you feeling? Be honest. Fine. On a scale of, fine meaning what, exactly? Fine meaning excellent, or fine meaning you've been distracted by something non-Quidditch related all week and you're hoping I won't notice because you think fine will cover it. Harry looked at him. I'm going to be good in the match, Oliver. Right. Good. Yes. Wood looked at him for a moment longer with the expression of someone who wanted to ask a follow-up question and had decided, wisely, not to. Then, team meeting in 20 minutes. Don't be late. He moved on down the table, delivering the same message to the Weasley twins with a significantly higher word count. Hermione was across the table and 3 seats down, already reading, her matchday scarf on correctly and her porridge largely untouched. She looked up once, caught Harry's eye, and gave him the microscopic nod that meant, I'm watching, I'll be paying attention, tell me everything afterward. She'd spent the last week reading everything she could find on seraphic entity theory, which was not a recognized field in wizarding academia but could be assembled from the margins of about 14 different texts if you were sufficiently determined. She'd assembled it. She'd filled 2 full notebooks and had started a 3rd. She was, Harry had reflected, the best person he'd ever met. Neville appeared beside him as he was leaving the Great Hall, matching his stride with the easy synchrony of someone who'd made a decision about where they were going to be. I'll be in the stands, Neville said. Top row. East side. You don't have to, I know. Neville's tone was the settled, precise one. I want to watch. Harry nodded. They parted at the stairs, and Harry went toward the changing rooms in the autumn morning light, and the mountains were clear and the lake was flat and silver, and he breathed the outside air with the specific pleasure of someone who had spent too much of his life indoors. The changing room before a match had its own atmosphere, the smell of broom polish and damp grass and the high-frequency energy of 7 people who were good at something and were about to do it in front of the entire school. Wood gave his pre-match speech, which had the structure of a classical oration and the emotional register of a man who would, in another life, have led armies. Harry listened with one ear and let the rest of himself simply be present, feeling the cool air through the gap in the changing room door, the ground beneath his feet. Something was off. Not dramatically off, not the sharp wrongness of a Dementor, not anything he could have pointed to and named. Just a faint dissonance, a note played slightly flat. The same feeling he'd had in the Great Hall on the first night when he'd noted the nervous family near the bookshop and the man who wasn't shopping. The world has a shape when it's operating correctly, and this morning the shape was slightly wrong around the edges. He didn't mention it. There was no specific thing to mention. He mounted his nimbus and rode out into the morning with his team, and the crowd hit like a wall of sound, 1,500 students and the visiting contingent from the school staff, scarves and noise and the particular electricity of 2 houses with a points rivalry that had built for 3 years. The Gryffindor stands were a sea of red and gold. The Slytherin stands had deployed a new tactic this year, a contingent of Slytherin boys all wearing large badges that shifted and flashed, though from this height Harry couldn't read what they said. Draco Malfoy was on the opposite end of the pitch. He'd gotten a new broom, a Nimbus 2001, or possibly the newer model, from this distance Harry couldn't tell, but the quality was obvious. Malfoy sat on it with the easy arrogance of someone who had been given the best equipment and couldn't quite distinguish between the equipment's quality and his own. He caught Harry's eye and smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had planned something. That was the note played flat. Madam Hooch released the snitch and blew the whistle. The match started well. Fred and George were in devastating form. Harry could hear their commentary via Lee Jordan, whose enthusiasm for describing their bludger work was only barely restrained by McGonagall, who was sitting beside him with a quill poised over the parchment on which she was presumably writing corrections to his most colorful observations. Angelina Johnson scored twice in the first 10 minutes off a passing combination with Katie Bell that was as clean as anything Harry had seen in practice. Harry climbed. He always climbed first, not to search for the snitch from height, though that was part of it, but because the altitude gave him the match's shape. You could see patterns from 300 feet that were invisible at ground level. Malfoy stayed below him, pacing, keeping Harry in view. The Slytherin chasers were working a specific pattern, not the most aggressive, but tight and positional, trying to run the clock. The first bludger hit the Gryffindor goalpost 10 minutes in. Standard play. The second hit Angelina's broom handle and sent her spinning. She recovered cleanly, but her timing was broken, and the Slytherin chasers went through the gap it created and scored. 40-20, Gryffindor. Harry spiraled higher and let himself read the game the way he always had, the game on the surface, the game beneath the surface. He spotted the snitch once, low and fast near the Slytherin goals, but Malfoy spotted it the same moment and was positioned better, and Harry pulled back. Too early, not enough lead. He needed 30 points at minimum before he made the catch. A snitch catch at a deficit ended the game wrong. He climbed again. At 250 feet the air tasted different, colder, cleaner, the noise of the crowd reduced to a shape rather than a sound. He could see the whole pitch from here, the whole school, the castle walls grey and warm in the sunlight, the forest dark to the east, the lake flat below. And he could feel the Dementors. Not close, not approaching, not on the pitch. On the edge of the grounds, at the perimeter, where they were supposed to stay. But their presence at the edge of his awareness was like a cold finger on the back of the neck, and he felt the warm thing in his chest orient toward them the way it had on the train, with that apprehension of fundamental wrongness. He set it aside. Not the time. He was scanning for the snitch when it happened. The bludger came from behind and above. That alone was wrong. Bludgers moved in arcs, in predictable trajectories. They were bewitched to target players, but their physics were broadly consistent. This one came in a straight line at high speed with the precise angle of something aimed rather than charted, and it hit his broom. Not him. The broom. Right at the junction of handle and tail, where the structural integrity of a broom was most vulnerable, where a hard enough impact would, and it did, the broom lurched, and Harry grabbed the handle with both hands and felt the vibration of something cracking, and then the tail end simply went, the back half of the nimbus splitting away, and he had half a broom and gravity and 270 feet of nothing between him and the ground. The roar of the crowd changed character completely. He heard Hermione's voice from the Gryffindor stands, not what she said, just the pitch of it, the sharp controlled alarm of someone very intelligent having a very bad second. He heard would shout something. He heard the crowd doing the collective thing crowds do when something terrible happens publicly, the sudden silence before the noise, the intake of breath. He was falling. Here is the thing about falling from 270 feet, it takes longer than you expect, and it is very clear, and the clarity does not feel like fear. The ground came up with the steady, accelerating patience of something that has all the time in the world. He could see individual faces in the stands. He could see McGonagall rising from her seat. He could see Dumbledore, at the top of the teacher's box, very still. He could see the sky above him, receding, the cold blue of the October morning. And in his chest, not fear, not panic, not the desperate reaching for something to save him, the seal cracked. Not thinned. Not pressured. Cracked. Like ice under a weight it was never meant to hold for this long, like a seed finally splitting open after everything, the cupboard, the mirror, the memories, the weeks of gradual remembering, had done its work. The sound of it was not a sound. It was a quality of light. It was the sensation of a door not opening but ceasing to exist, the frame going to, and all the light that had been waiting behind it for 13 years pouring out all at once, irresistible and total, like a river through a broken dam. Harry stopped falling. Not slowed, stopped. At 60 feet. As if the air had decided to participate in something it had been expecting. The wings came out. 12 feet on each side, silver-white where the light was pure, dark-edged where the judgment lived, each feather a distinct and articulated piece of something that was not flesh and not magic in any classification Wizarding Britain had a name for, something older, something structural, the physical manifestation of din in the material world, enormous and real and undeniable in the clear October morning. They didn't flap. They didn't need to. They simply were, and their being was enough, the way light doesn't need to push to displace darkness. He descended. Not fell, descended. Controlled, deliberate, unhurried, with the easy authority of something that has remembered it does not need to be afraid of gravity because gravity is a property of the world and he is the thing the world was made for. He landed on the pitch. Both feet. Even. Still. His half-broom hit the grass beside him a second later, almost as an afterthought. The silence was total. 1,500 people and not one of them making a sound. The kind of silence that has weight, that has texture, that is not the absence of noise but the presence of something so large that noise doesn't know how to exist alongside it yet. The wings were still out. 24 feet of silver and judgment dark against the October sky, spread wide over the Quidditch pitch, over the pale grass and the goalposts and the small frozen figures of 14 Quidditch players who had all, independently, stopped moving. Harry stood in the center of it and looked up at the stands. Dumbledore was gripping the rail of the teacher's box. He was not afraid, Dumbledore was not a man easily frightened, but he was gripping it with both hands, and the half-moon glasses were very still on his face, and the expression behind them was not the usual warm calculation. It was the expression of a man who has just revised a very large assumption. Hermione was already moving. She'd vaulted the low wall of the Gryffindor stands and was on the pitch in 30 seconds, and when she reached Harry she didn't exclaim, didn't stare, didn't ask any of the 1,000 questions that were clearly fighting for priority behind her eyes. She stood beside him and looked out at the crowd with the calm competence of someone who had decided what her job was. Her job was to stand there. So that he wasn't standing alone. He was deeply grateful for that. From the top row of the east stands, Neville Longbottom looked at the wings spread wide across the pitch, at Harry standing still in the center of them, at the sky blazing behind it all, and he said, audibly, into the profound silence, his voice carrying in the way that quiet voices do when everything else is completely still, took you long enough. And Harry, from the middle of the pitch, heard it clearly. And the corner of his mouth turned up. The wings retracted. Not immediately, they didn't vanish with the embarrassed haste of something that shouldn't have appeared. They retracted the way they'd emerged, completely, with authority, on their own terms, folding back into the space beneath Harry's skin with the settled patience of something returning home because it has decided to, not because it's been told to. The seal was gone. He could feel that, the absence where it had been, like a scar gone smooth. What it had been holding was now simply part of him, integrated, the way Sariel and Harry had been integrating since September, since before September, since the moment in the cupboard. Not two things occupying the same space. One thing, fully itself. The noise came back all at once, the crowd finding its voice, 1,500 people exhaling simultaneously and immediately filling the silence with the human need to say something about what they'd just seen. It was not one reaction. It was 40 reactions, simultaneous, from shock to awe to the specific Slytherin response of calculating what this changed. Madame Hooch landed 10 feet away and looked at him with the expression of someone whose professional training had not included this scenario. Potter, she said carefully. Madame Hooch. Are you injured? No. She looked at where his broom had landed. Your broom was hit, Harry said. By a bludger that moved in a straight line from a specific angle. That's not standard bludger behavior. He looked at her steadily. Someone modified a bludger this morning. I'd like to know who. The directness of it, the complete absence of shock or distress in his voice, the calm factual statement of a thing that had attempted to kill him, seemed to give Hooch a reference point to operate from. She straightened. Her referee's composure settled back into place. The match is suspended. Everyone off the pitch. She raised her wand and fired 3 red sparks. Everyone. Off. Now. The investigation happened in the way Hogwarts investigations happened when they involved both a professor with a genuine agenda for discovering the truth and a headmaster who needed to understand what he was looking at. Flint's expression in the changing rooms afterward was the expression of someone who had nothing to do with it and knew exactly who did, which Harry filed and held. The bludger was found to have been tampered with, a modification to its trajectory enchantment, subtle, the kind of thing that would look like normal bludger behavior until it was given a specific target at a specific moment. It was precise work. Not a student's work. McGonagall's face went through several distinct phases during the examination of the bludger, ending at a controlled fury that she wore like a second robe, neat, professional, visible only if you knew where to look. She looked at Dumbledore once, briefly, with the expression of someone who had a great deal to say and had decided this was not the moment. Dumbledore looked at the bludger, and then at Harry, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at each other across the changing room, and Harry felt the assessment in it, the deep, careful, recalculating assessment of a very intelligent man who had been operating on a model that had just proven insufficient. Harry, Dumbledore said. His voice was what it always was, warm, precise, carrying the specific weight of someone who had long since learned to be very careful with words. Are you well? Yes. Physically unharmed? Yes. A pause. I would very much like to speak with you. This evening, if you're amenable. My office. Of course, Harry said. And held Dumbledore's gaze with the clear, unsurprised patience of someone who had expected this and was entirely ready for it. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment longer. Something moved in his expression, not fear, but a neighboring emotion, the response of a man who has played very long games and has just encountered a piece that doesn't move the way pieces are supposed to move. Good, he said quietly. Good. The Gryffindor changing room emptied out slowly. Oliver Wood sat on the bench for a long time, processing, his keeper gloves still on, before he said, "Did we win or not?" Technically. Is there a ruling? Match suspended, George said. No result. Replay scheduled. Right. Wood absorbed this. And is Harry, he looked at Harry, who was sitting at the other end of the bench still in his Quidditch robes. Harry, are you, fine, Oliver? Your broom's destroyed. I know. Dumbledore will do something about that, surely. Or, I mean, he ran out of sentence. There were no precedents for this. The captain's handbook did not have a section on what to do when your seeker reveals themselves to be a millennia-old divine entity during a match. Oliver, Harry said. Yeah. Breathe. Wood breathed. Right, he said. Right. Okay. Fred, perched on the bench across, was watching Harry with an expression that was, for Fred Weasley, unusually quiet. Usually Fred's face had at least 3 things happening at once. Right now it had one thing, honest, uncomplicated wonder, the expression of someone who has just seen something real and has not yet decided what to do with it. The wings, he said. Just that. Yeah, Harry said. They were, Fred stopped. Yeah, Harry said. I've never seen, Fred stopped again. No, Harry said. They were, George said from beside his twin, and George's voice had the specific quality of someone finishing a sentence that needs to exist even if the full thought can't be articulated yet, really something. Yes, Harry said. They were. He said it simply, without pride or false modesty, because it was simply true. They were real, and they were his, and they were really something. That was exactly what they were. The afternoon had the particular quality of a day after a large event, the air slightly rearranged, conversations happening in low voices, people processing. Harry walked back to the castle with Hermione and Ron, and the student body parted for them, not dramatically, not with a clearing of the way, but with the unconscious adjustment of people who have recalibrated where something is in the room. He was aware of the looking. He'd been aware of being looked at before, the price of being Harry Potter, which he'd never fully made peace with, the being stared at for things that happened to him rather than things he'd done. This was different. They were looking at something he was, not something that had happened to him, and that difference was enormous even though the looking looked the same from the outside. Ron walked on his left and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. Then, after 100 yards, "I've got questions." "I know. A lot of questions." "I know. I'm going to write them down in order of importance and ask them systematically, because otherwise it'll come out as just noise." "That's very organized of you." "Hermione's rubbing off on me," Ron said, and Hermione, on Harry's right, made a sound of dignified acknowledgement. Then Ron said, still forward-facing, still walking, "They were beautiful, by the way. The wings." And his voice was steady and honest and completely without agenda. "Just, really, genuinely beautiful. I thought you should know that. I don't know what to do with it, but I thought you should know." Harry was quiet for a moment. The castle's front doors were ahead, warm light through the stone arch. "Thanks, Ron," he said. "Right. Systematic questions later." "Systematic questions later," Harry agreed. The common room was organized chaos. The Gryffindor population had opinions, specifically about 4 simultaneous things, and everyone had them at the same time. Harry sat in his usual chair and let it happen, answering direct questions directly, deflecting the ones that didn't have answers yet, and watching the room with the attention that had become automatic. He could see the different responses clearly, the students who'd decided this was brilliant and were already enthusiastically on his side, the students who'd decided this was alarming and were doing the careful social calculation of whether being alarmed was the correct public position, the students who simply didn't know what to think and were waiting for someone they trusted to decide first. Ginny sat on the arm of the chair across from him. She had her legs crossed and her arms folded, and the particular Weasley quality of someone who says things plainly. "Bellatrix Lestrange is in Azkaban," she said. "Yes. When you go, and I know you're going, I'm not going to hurt her," Harry said. "If that's what you're asking." Ginny looked at him. "That's not what I was asking." A pause. "I was going to say, make sure she knows why. Make sure she understands what it is that came for the people she put there." Her voice was even. "I want her to live with that." Harry looked at her. Ginny Weasley, who had survived a year of being slowly consumed from the inside by the darkest artifact of the darkest wizard of the age, who had come out the other side with something harder and cleaner and more particular in her. "Yes," he said. "I can do that." She unfolded her arms. "Good." Dumbledore's office was the same as it always was, the instruments, the portraits, Fawkes in the corner, the shelves of things that ticked and measured and observed. Fawkes looked at Harry when he came in and made a low sound, not the full song, not the phoenix fire of a battlefield or a healing, something quieter. A recognition sound. The sound of one ancient thing acknowledging another. Harry sat down. Dumbledore did not immediately speak. This was a tactic, Harry had learned it, the way silence was a kind of question, the way sitting with it long enough often produced more honesty than a direct interrogation. He sat with the silence for a respectful moment, acknowledging it, and then said, "You wanted to speak." Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon glasses. In the warm light of the office, with Fawkes quiet behind him and the portraits watching from the walls, he looked old, not tired, not diminished, but old in the real sense, the accumulated sense, the way a mountain is old. "I have been," Dumbledore said carefully, "operating on an incomplete understanding of you." "Yes," Harry said. "Not unkindly. I knew, when I placed you with your aunt and uncle, that you were not ordinary. The events of your survival were extraordinary enough to require extraordinary explanation. But I attributed the extraordinary to the mechanics of the sacrifice, the ancient blood magic, the specific circumstances of that night. He paused. I did not consider that there might be an older explanation. You knew something was different, Harry said. Professor Lupin said. Lupin saw what I sent him to see, Dumbledore said, with the quiet candor of a man being honest about something he'd orchestrated. I asked him to watch you this year. To report anything unusual. He folded his hands. He reported what happened on the train. And today I saw. He stopped. Wings, Harry said. Yes. You're wondering what I am. I'm wondering, Dumbledore said, how I should have been understanding you all along. And there was something in the saying of it that was not Dumbledore the strategist but Dumbledore the human being, an old man sitting across from a 13-year-old and acknowledging, with complete sincerity, that he'd gotten something significant wrong. Harry looked at him. The warm thing in his chest did not feel anger toward this man, had not felt it, had noted his choices with the weight of the scale clarity and found them wanting but not wicked. Dumbledore had confused strategy for care. He'd placed Harry in the Dursleys' house because of blood protection, because of the chessboard, because of the plan that had 17 years of threads running through it. He'd done it believing it was right. He'd been wrong, but the wrongness was the wrongness of a man who had learned to think too long about consequences and had forgotten to simply look at the face in front of him. I'm going to tell you something, Harry said. And I'd like you to listen without planning what to do about it while I'm still talking. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. That is a more difficult request than it sounds, he said. I know. Try anyway. Another pause. Then, with the gravity of someone committing to something, all right. There are people in Azkaban who were never tried. Sirius Black is one of them. There are others, dozens, minimum, who are there on emergency wartime certifications that were never reviewed. I know this not from research, though the research confirms it. I know it the way I know the bludger this morning was aimed. The way I know what's right and what isn't. He held Dumbledore's gaze. The Dementors are consuming them. Every day. Not as a side effect of imprisonment, as the intended mechanism. The Ministry decided that letting monsters eat people's souls was an acceptable form of punishment. It isn't acceptable. It isn't a legal question or a political question. It's a question with only one correct answer. Dumbledore was very still. I'm going to Azkaban, Harry said. Not tomorrow. When I'm ready. I'm telling you this because you have a choice about what you do with that information. You can try to stop me, which I don't recommend, not because I'd hurt you, I wouldn't, but because it won't work and it will cost us time we could use better. He paused. Or you can think about whether there are things you can do on the side of this that uses the systems you understand. Legal review. Quiet investigations. Preparing the ground for what happens after. He stopped talking. Dumbledore was silent for a long time. Fawkes made the soft sound again. One of the instruments on the shelves ticked 3 times and stopped. Sirius, Dumbledore said finally. If he's innocent, he is. You know this. Yes. How? The same way I know everything I've just told you. Harry looked at him steadily. The same way I knew the bludger was wrong before it hit me. It's not a feeling and it's not a guess. It's what I am. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. And Harry let himself be looked at, fully, with the unhurried patience of something that has all the time it needs, which he did, and he did. You are not, Dumbledore said quietly, what I thought you were. I am exactly what you thought I was, Harry said. Just considerably more of it. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, the complicated twitch of a man who has just had a genuinely good line deployed at his expense and can't decide whether to be impressed or chastened. He settled, apparently, on both. I will, he said carefully, look at the records. The trial records. I have access to Wizengamot archives that are not publicly available. A pause. I will not tell you what to do. I find I have done enough of that. That's a start, Harry said. Not unkindly. Not warmly, either. Honestly. He stood. The bludger was modified by someone with access to the equipment before the match. It wasn't a student. The enchantment work was too precise. He looked at Dumbledore. I'd look at who's been in contact with Marcus Flint in the last week. Dumbledore blinked. Lucius Malfoy was here on Wednesday, he said, almost to himself. Ostensibly regarding the school's equipment budget, not ostensibly, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. Not ostensibly. Harry picked up his bag. Good night, Professor. Harry. Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. He turned. The headmaster was looking at him from behind his glasses with something that had moved past calculation into something simpler and older. I am sorry, he said. For the Dursleys. For the years of it. I made a choice that I believed was strategically sound and did not think carefully enough about what it cost. He held Harry's gaze. I am sorry. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. The warm thing in his chest did not produce easy forgiveness. Forgiveness wasn't simple, and pretending it was would have been false. But it produced something. The recognition that a man who had made many powerful people do things they didn't want to do had just, in a quiet office at night, said I was wrong without qualification or excuse. I know, Harry said. It doesn't fix it. But I heard you. He went. He stood on the astronomy tower in the dark because he needed air and height and the specific clarity of being above the tree-line. The lake was a mirror far below, and the mountains were dark against a clear sky, and the wind was cold and clean. He put his hands on the stone rail and looked out over Scotland and breathed. The wings were still, folded back. He could feel them the way he'd always felt the warm thing, present, settled, part of him. No longer a secret and no longer a pressure and no longer the thing beneath the seal. Just wings. His wings. He heard the step on the stair before she reached the top, Hermione's step, which was always precise, always deliberate, never the tentative one-step pause one-step of someone unsure of their welcome. She came and stood beside him at the rail and looked out at the same dark and was quiet for a moment. How was Dumbledore, she said. Honest. Finally. How was he actually? Shaken, Harry said. But good shaken. The kind that produces change rather than resistance. She nodded. Lucius Malfoy modified the bludger. Through Flint, probably. Dumbledore's looking at it. Good. A pause. She pulled her robes tighter against the wind. Harry. Today, when you were falling, before the wings came out. I need to tell you something. He looked at her. I was terrified. She said it with the same precision she brought to everything, as if the accurate description of an emotional state was as important as the accurate description of a chemical reaction. Not in a useful way. Not the kind of terrified that makes you do something. Just, stopped. Completely. She looked at her hands on the rail. I've been afraid before, plenty of times. But that was, Hermione. I'm telling you because, she stopped. Restarted. Because you deserve to know that you matter to the specific people around you, not just in the abstract way of being important or significant. You matter to me in the particular, specific way of, I couldn't breathe for about 4 seconds. And then the wings came out. Her voice changed slightly on that last sentence, something in it that was not quite awe but lived close to it. And I could breathe again. He looked at her for a moment. The wind moved her hair. The lake was still below them. 4 seconds, he said. Approximately. That's, very precisely measured, yes, I know. The corner of her mouth moved. Hermione Granger, mortified by the presence of ordinary human feeling. Film at 11. Harry laughed. It came out full and real, with none of the careful management of his usual reactions, and the sound of it surprised him slightly, the laugh of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had just, tonight, put it down. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, when the laugh had settled. "I know. Whatever comes next, Azkaban, the Ministry, all of it. I'm not going anywhere. I know that too." She looked out at the dark. "I'm going to be there for all of it, just so you're aware. Whatever you're planning. I'm in it. Hermione, don't tell me it's dangerous." "It is dangerous." "Noted. Disregarded." She straightened from the rail. "I've prepared 6 inches of notes on seraphic entity theory and I have a very clear picture of what we're dealing with and I have decided, with complete information, that I'm in." She held his gaze. "You need someone who can hold the human side of this. Who can do the research and navigate the systems and make sure the plan accounts for things that an ancient divine being might not think to account for." She paused. "Like returning library books." "Like returning library books," Harry agreed. She went back down the stairs, precise step by precise step, leaving him with the dark and the wind and the lake below. He turned back to the mountains. Somewhere out there, past the wards and the water and the flat grey sea, an island of black stone held its prisoners in the cold dark, and in a cell in the deep of it a man with hollow eyes was sitting with his hand against the wall and feeling it thrum. Coming, Harry thought. Not a promise, a fact, clear and structural, the way the result of a correct calculation is a fact. Not yet. But coming. The wind carried it nowhere. It didn't need to. He already knew where it would land. Chapter 5, The Trial of Memory. The Ministry of Magic letter arrived on a Thursday. It came by Ministry Owl, a severe grey bird that looked like it had never once in its professional life delivered good news and had made peace with this, and it landed in front of Harry at breakfast with the particular decisive thump of official correspondence that has been sent by people who believe their correspondence should make an impression. Harry ate a bite of toast. Looked at the envelope. Ate another bite of toast. "Are you going to open it?" Ron said. "In a moment. It has a seal on it. The ministry seal. I can see that." Harry, that's not a school letter." "No," Harry agreed, and opened it. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first established, in the careful bureaucratic language of people who had spent decades making things sound less alarming than they were, that the Ministry of Magic, Department of Magical Creatures and Being Classification, in conjunction with the Office of Magical Law Enforcement, had become aware of an incident at Hogwarts School on the 14th of October involving the manifestation of an unclassified magical entity or entities, and wished to extend an invitation. The word invitation was doing an enormous amount of work, for Harry James Potter to present himself at the Ministry of Magic, specifically the Department of Mysteries Liaison Office, at his earliest convenience, which the letter then defined as the following Tuesday. The second paragraph noted that this was entirely voluntary, that Harry was of course under no obligation, and then spent 3 sentences explaining precisely what the consequences of not attending voluntarily would be, which rather defeated the purpose of calling it voluntary. The third paragraph was signed by Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic, and it ended with a sentence that had been carefully constructed to sound like a pleasantry while functioning as a threat. "We so look forward to meeting you and to ensuring that all is properly understood and correctly categorized." Harry folded the letter. Put it in his pocket. "Well?" Ron said. "They want me at the ministry on Tuesday." Hermione had already put down her fork. She had the look of someone who had been expecting a version of this and was now running the specific version against her preparations to see which scenario she was in. "Voluntary or, the letter calls it voluntary." "The letter is lying." "Right." She picked up her fork again, which meant she was thinking, not eating. "They're going to try to classify you. Under the Being Classification Statutes, something that manifests non-one magic at that scale and isn't human categorized, gets classified as a creature," Harry said. "Which removes legal personhood." Which means they can regulate you. Contain you. Potentially, legally, under the statutes, restrain you from using your abilities without ministry approval. She said it levelly, the way she said things that were outrageous when she wanted to give you the full weight of the outrage without editorializing. It's what they did with werewolves. And centaurs. It's their move when something doesn't fit the framework. I know. Harry finished his toast. I'm going. Of course you are. Ron said this with the complete absence of surprise of someone who has known Harry Potter for 3 years. Are we coming? No. He looked at Ron's immediate expression of protest. You'd spend the whole time angry, which is completely fair but also not useful. I need to be the only temperature in the room. Ron closed his mouth. Opened it again. That's fine. That's actually a reasonable point. I hate it but it's reasonable. I'll go, Hermione said. Hermione, I'll go because I have done extensive legal research on the classification statutes and the precedents, and if they try to invoke them I can cite the Ogilvy exception from 1843, the Marchbanks ruling from 1901, and the relevant sections of the International Confederation's Charter on Magical Persons which the Ministry of Magic is a signatory to. She said this without pausing for breath. Also I'd like to see them try to tell you what you are. Harry looked at her for a moment. You researched the legal framework. I researched the legal framework. When? Starting the morning after the Quidditch match. She picked up her pumpkin juice. I've had the relevant materials sent from my parents' address because the Hogwarts Library's law section is adequate but not comprehensive. I now have a fairly complete picture of every mechanism the Ministry might attempt to use and their specific legal vulnerabilities. She set down her glass. I've also drafted a counterclassification argument based on the precedent that self-determination of nature cannot be externally imposed on any entity demonstrating cognitive and moral agency above the threshold established in the Confederation's 1899 Sentient Beings Charter. Ron stared at her. You did all that in 4 days, she said. I work quickly when I'm motivated. What motivated you? She looked at him with the patient expression she used when the answer was obvious. Someone I care about, she said simply, and picked up her fork again, and that was that. Harry went to Lupin that afternoon. Not for reassurance, he wasn't looking for reassurance. He went because Lupin knew the Ministry in the specific way of someone who had spent years navigating a system that had decided to have opinions about what he was, and that knowledge was useful. He found him in the defense classroom after the last lesson of the day, sitting at his desk with a cup of tea that had gone cold and a stack of essays he was marking with the careful attention he gave everything. He looked up when Harry came in. Took in Harry's expression. Put down his quill. Ministry letter, Harry said. I heard, Lupin said. Dumbledore told me this morning. Harry sat on the nearest desk. They're going to try to classify me. Yes. Lupin said it without softening it. That's their reflex. Something new, something powerful, something they don't understand, classify it, contain it, regulate it. It's not malice, usually. It's fear dressed as procedure. Umbridge signed the letter. Lupin's expression changed slightly. Then it's both. What do you know about her? He considered this carefully, with the thoroughness of someone who had learned that descriptions of dangerous people should be accurate. She believes in the Ministry the way some people believe in a religion, not because of evidence or outcome, but because the structure of it gives her life meaning and authority. Remove the Ministry's power and Dolores Umbridge is a small woman with a talent for cruelty and no canvas for it. He paused. Which makes her more dangerous than someone who is simply cruel, because she needs the institution to function, which means she will defend it past the point that any reasonable person would. She enjoys it, Harry said. The power. Yes. That's useful to know. Harry looked at the windows, the afternoon light going gold over the grounds. I'm not going to be afraid of her. I know. I'm not going to be careful, or diplomatic, or, I know how to be those things, but I'm not going to do it in a way that concedes anything real." Lupin was quiet for a moment. "There's a difference," he said carefully, "between refusing to concede and refusing to be strategic. You can do both. You can walk into that room knowing exactly what you're doing and let them make every mistake they're going to make while being completely honest the entire time." He met Harry's eyes. "You don't need to be anything other than what you are. Being what you are is enough." Harry looked at him. "You and my father. James." Lupin's voice carried the weight of it, the way the name of someone lost always carries the specific weight of all the particular things they were. "He would have been," he stopped. "Proud?" Harry said, not sentimentally, factually. "Terrified," Lupin said, with a sudden almost smile. "Terrified and absolutely delighted. In that order. Probably simultaneously." The almost smile settled. "And yes. Proud." Harry nodded. "Sirius Black," he said. Lupin went still. "I told Dumbledore he's innocent." "Dumbledore's looking at the trial records." Harry held his gaze. "You believe it too." "I know you believe it. I need to know what you know." The classroom was very quiet. The afternoon light moved across the floorboards. Then Lupin told him. "All of it. The Marauders. The Secret Keeper. The Switch, Sirius's idea," he said, the brilliant terrible irony of it, moving the Secret Keeper to Peter precisely because Peter was the unexpected choice, the one Voldemort wouldn't target. The betrayal. The night everything ended. Peter, who had been afraid, who had been Voldemort's spy for a year, who had blown up a street and cut off his own finger and transformed and run. Who was alive? Who was a rat? Harry listened to all of it, and the warm thing in his chest was very quiet and very certain during all of it, weighing and knowing, the scale in him tilting further and further toward the irrevocable truth of it. "You've known," Harry said, when Lupin had finished, "for 12 years. That Peter is alive. That Sirius is innocent." "I've known since the night it happened," Lupin said, with the hollow evenness of a man reading a sentence he has read to himself 10,000 times. "I knew Peter. I knew what he was capable of. I knew what Sirius was capable of, and betrayal was not it." He looked at his hands. "I said nothing. I was not in a condition to say much of anything, that first year. And then time passed, and the ministry had already, and it got harder. Every year it got harder. The longer I said nothing, the more the saying of it would cost and the less it would be believed." His voice was even, but under it, the sound of someone who has not forgiven himself for a thing and is not sure he ever will. "I failed him. I failed James and Lily's memory." You're going to have the chance to say it now," Harry said. "Not gently, directly. When it counts. When it can actually change something. That's what matters." Lupin looked at him. Harry held the gaze, and the thing in his chest did not let him look away from this man's grief, did not let him offer easy absolution or comfortable platitude. He let Remus Lupin be looked at clearly, and he let the weight of the look be real, and then he said, "I'm going to need a witness. Someone who knows the truth from the beginning. Someone who can corroborate Peter Pettigrew's survival when the time comes." "Yes," Lupin said. Without hesitation. "Yes. Whatever is needed." "All right." Harry stood. "Thank you, Professor." "Harry." Lupin looked up at him. "When you go to the ministry, whatever they try to make you into, whatever category they reach for, don't let them name you. If you let them name you, they'll believe the name is real." "They don't get to name me," Harry said simply. "I know what I am." Tuesday came grey and cold, the sky low over London, the city doing its Tuesday thing of moving with purpose and no particular joy. Harry and Hermione arrived at the ministry entrance via the telephone box on the embankment, descending into the cool gleaming atrium with its golden fountain and its polished floors and the self-important bustle of an institution that had long since confused its own administration with the actual work it was supposed to do. Hermione had her briefcase, her actual briefcase, which she'd brought from home, full of legal texts and cross-referenced notes and the specific organized fury of someone who had done their research and intended everyone to know it. She was wearing robes that were neat and correct and completely unremarkable, which was itself a kind of statement. I am here in the capacity of a person who knows the rules and is prepared to deploy them. Harry was wearing his school robes. He had not dressed up for this. He'd thought about it and concluded that dressing up would be a form of performance, and he wasn't here to perform. The atrium worker at the desk gave them visitor badges. Harry said Harry Potter, student. He looked at it, then at the worker, then clipped it to his robe and walked on. The Department of Mysteries liaison office was on level 9, past the corridor where the Wizengamot held its sessions, past the courtrooms, past the offices that hummed with the particular energy of bureaucracy that believed it was important. The liaison office had a door that was trying too hard to be ordinary, completely plain, no nameplate, the specific nondescript quality of a door that very much wants you not to ask what's behind it. Harry opened it. The room was large. Larger than it needed to be for what was nominally a meeting, which was itself a statement. The ceiling was high and the lighting was the flat institutional kind that had no opinion about time of day. A long table. Chairs on one side for Harry and Hermione, and on the other side, 5 people. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, in his lime-green bowler hat, with the expression of a man who had prepared a specific kind of confidence and was finding it slightly more effortful than he'd expected to maintain now that the subject of the meeting had actually walked in. 2 Aurors Harry didn't know, positioned at the edges of the room in the specific way that was designed to not look like positioning. A man in plain robes with a quill and parchment, a note-taker, ministry official. And Dolores Umbridge, in a cardigan the color of old blood, with her hands folded on the table and the fixed smile sitting on her face like a mask that had been there so long it had attached itself. She looked at Harry when he came in. Harry looked at her. There was a quality in her eyes that he recognized immediately, the way you recognize a species you've read about, the specific brightness of someone who has arranged a situation to their advantage and is enjoying the arrangement. She had the room. She had the Aurors and the minister and the official note-taker. She had the high ceiling and the flat light and the long table designed to place authority on one side and petitioner on the other. She smiled. Harry sat down. He did not wait to be invited. He sat where he intended to sit, placed his hands flat on the table, and looked across it with the clear, unhurried patience of something that has been in rooms with considerably more authority than this and has not found authority intimidating for a very long time. Hermione sat beside him and opened her briefcase. Fudge cleared his throat. Mr. Potter. Thank you for coming. He had clearly planned to sound authoritative. He sounded, instead, like a man finding his rehearsed lines slightly ill-fitting now that he was wearing them. We appreciate your cooperation in this matter. Minister, Harry said pleasantly. Madam Umbridge. Her smile tightened microscopically. She didn't like being named second, he noted. Good to know. As outlined in our letter, Fudge continued, we've called this meeting in response to the incident at Hogwarts on the 14th. There was a manifestation, of sorts. A significant one. And it's the ministry's responsibility to ensure that everything is properly understood and correctly categorized, Harry said. Yes. I read the letter. Quite. Fudge adjusted his hat. So. In the interest of proper understanding, perhaps you could describe, in your own words, what happened, Harry said, is that a Quidditch match was sabotaged. A bludger was modified by an outside party to fly in a straight line at my broom at a specific trajectory calculated to cause structural failure. At 270 feet. The fall should have killed me. He said this with the same even quality he'd have used to describe the weather. It didn't. When it became apparent that I was going to impact the ground at a fatal velocity, I manifested my wings and arrested the fall. Silence. Your wings, said the note-taker, quill poised. My wings, yes. And these wings are mine, Harry said. They belong to me. They are part of me. They have always been part of me. They were simply not visible until the circumstances made concealment, not impossible, but unnecessary. He looked at Umbridge. I'm not in the habit of concealing what I am when concealment serves no useful purpose. Umbridge spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, with the specific quality of softness that isn't gentleness but its opposite, the softness of a thing designed to not set off alarm before it closes. Mr. Potter. We're so glad you feel comfortable speaking openly. That's exactly what we hoped for. She unfolded her hands. I think what the minister is trying to establish is the nature of your abilities. Their origin. Their scope. A brief, kind pause. You understand that the ministry has a responsibility to classify all magical entities operating within British magical jurisdiction. Entities, Harry said. Beings, she amended, with the smoothness of someone who had planned to say entities and was now recalculating. All beings demonstrating unusual magical properties are subject to classification under the Beings Classification Act of 1811, Hermione said, from beside Harry, with the professional crispness of someone setting a document on a table. She placed a page of notes in front of her. As amended in 1871, 1923, and 1967. I've reviewed the relevant sections. I'd like to raise the Marchbanks ruling of 1901, which established that classification cannot be externally imposed on any being demonstrating self-determined cognitive moral agency. She looked up. Harry demonstrates self-determined cognitive moral agency. Therefore, any classification must be undertaken with his informed participation and explicit consent. Without that consent, the classification process is not legally binding under any precedent this ministry has followed in the last 125 years. The note-taker's quill had stopped moving. He was looking between Hermione and Umbridge with the expression of someone realizing the shape of the room had changed. Umbridge's smile didn't waver. Miss Granger, Hermione said. Hermione Granger. Harry's advocate for this meeting. Which is permitted under Clause 14 of the Ministry's own meeting protocol charter. She turned a page. I have that here, if you'd like to verify. We know our own charter, Miss Granger, Umbridge said, still soft, still smiling. Thank you so much. Harry watched Umbridge watching Hermione, and he saw it clearly, the recalculation, the decision, the moment she filed Hermione Granger and pivoted away from the legal argument. She was adaptable. He'd give her that. Mr. Potter, she said, turning back to him. Regardless of the legal nuances, which we're very grateful Miss Granger has raised, let's set the formalities aside for a moment, shall we, and simply talk. Being to being, as it were. The smile did something complicated. We're concerned about you. About your well-being. About the fact that clearly something quite extraordinary is happening to you, and we'd like to understand it. To help. Help. There it was. That's very kind, Harry said. I'm well. Of course, of course. But the wings, the scale of the manifestation, that must be quite overwhelming. For a young person. No. She blinked. No. Not overwhelming. It's simply what I am. I'm not overwhelmed by being what I am. A pause. The smile held, but something behind it had shifted, the recalibration of a person who had prepared for a child and was encountering something that wasn't one. You seem very certain, she said, with the careful quality of someone deploying gentleness as a tool. For someone your age. Harry looked at her with the clear patience of something very, very old sitting across a table from something comparatively very new. I'm 13, he said. In this particular body, in this particular life. But I'm also considerably older than that. You know this. You've read whatever briefing was prepared for this meeting. You know what was observed on the 14th, and you've had people look at it, and they've told you that what manifested on that pitch is not a category you have. He tilted his head slightly. So let's be honest with each other. You don't want to understand me. You want to control me. And you're finding it more difficult than expected to locate the mechanism for doing that. Fudge made a sound. Umbridge's smile stayed on her face by what appeared to be sheer force of professional habit. That's a rather, Fudge started. I have a question, Harry said. Fudge stopped. How many people are currently imprisoned in Azkaban who were never given a trial? The room changed. Not dramatically, nothing moved, nothing shifted visually. But the quality of the air changed, the way air changes before lightning, and every person on the other side of the table registered the question landing with the specific, involuntary physical quality of people who had been hit with something they weren't prepared for. The note-taker's quill had stopped again. Fudge's mouth was open. Umbridge's smile, finally, was gone. That's, Fudge said. That's not, this meeting is about, Bartemius Crouch Sr. was granted emergency wartime powers in November 1981, Harry said. He used those powers 47 times in 6 weeks. Of those 47 cases, 12 are documented as having received formal trials with evidence presented. That leaves 35. Of those 35, I'd like to know how many are still in Azkaban. He held Fudge's gaze with the steady, unblinking attention of something that does not get uncomfortable in silence. I'd also like to know the specific legal authority under which Sirius Black was imprisoned, because I've read the public record and the warrant record and I cannot find a trial. I can find a certification. I cannot find a trial. Sirius Black, Umbridge said, and her voice had changed, the softness was gone, replaced with something harder and flatter, the voice of someone who has stopped playing the current game and is switching games, is a convicted murderer and he's a convicted nothing, Harry said pleasantly. Conviction requires a trial. Where's the trial? Silence. Where's the trial, he said again. There are records, Fudge said, but the confidence was fully gone now, replaced by the specific discomfort of a man who knows that what he's saying isn't true and suspects that the person across from him knows it too. The emergency certification is not a trial, Harry said. Is not a conviction. Is not a legal basis for 12 years of imprisonment. He looked at Fudge steadily. A man has spent 12 years in Azkaban because Bartemius Crouch pointed at him and no one asked for evidence. I want to know how the Minister for Magic justifies that. Mr. Potter, Umbridge said, and she had found a new register, not soft, not warm, but firm, the controlled firmness of someone who has decided that the pretense of helpfulness is no longer worth maintaining. The cases of those imprisoned under wartime emergency orders are not within the scope of this meeting, which was convened specifically to. I know what it was convened to do, Harry said. But this is what I'm interested in discussing. He met her eyes across the table, and he let her see it, not a threat, not anger, just the clear, deep, unperturbed certainty of something that knows what it knows and has decided to say it plainly. You called this meeting because you want to know what I am and what I can do and whether you can regulate it. I understand that impulse. I'm telling you, honestly, that you can't. Not because I'm dangerous, though I may be, to specific things, but because what I am is the apprehension of what is correct. You cannot regulate the knowledge of what's right. You can only choose whether to be on the right side of it. The room was very still. What I'm asking about Sirius Black, he continued, in the same even tone, is not a threat. It's not a demand. It's a question that you should be asking yourselves. A man is in Azkaban without a trial. More than one man. More than one person. They are being held by a system that decided, during a crisis, that efficiency mattered more than accuracy, and nobody has gone back to check. He paused. I'm telling you now that someone is going to check. I'd like it to be you, first. Through the systems you have. The legal review processes you have. The appeal mechanisms the law provides for. Are you threatening the ministry? Umbridge said. I'm giving it an opportunity, Harry said. Which is considerably more than it gave Sirius Black. Fudge was looking at him with the expression of a man who had managed a political career by never standing in front of anything he couldn't step around, and who was beginning to understand that this particular thing went in every direction. We would of course look into any legitimate concerns about due process, he said, which was the sentence of a man buying time. Good, Harry said. I'd start with the Black case. The records are in the Wisengamot archive. Professor Dumbledore has offered to assist with the review. He watched Fudge process the information that Dumbledore was already involved with something the ministry hadn't sanctioned, and watched the specific political calculation that produced, the arithmetic of whose power mattered more in this context. He filed the calculation. He looked at Umbridge. She was watching him with the flat, contained expression of someone who has encountered a problem they can't solve immediately and has decided to defer it until better tools are available. It was, he recognized, the most dangerous version of Dolores Umbridge, not the one that was performing warmth, but the one that was simply waiting. Madam Umbridge, he said. I want to be clear about something. She said nothing. Whatever you're planning, whatever the next step in whatever strategy this was the opening move of, I'd like you to know that I'm aware of it. Not the specifics. But the shape of it. The goal of it. He held her gaze with the same unhurried clarity he'd held everyone else's. I'm not afraid of you. Not because you're not capable of doing damage, you are. But because the kind of damage you're capable of operates on things I don't have anymore. Fear of institutional disapproval. Fear of being classified as something lesser. Fear of being made small. He paused. Those aren't available to me. Her expression didn't change. But I want to be clear, he continued, that I don't bear you any malice. What you do because you believe the institution is worth protecting. I'm not here to destroy the institution. I'm here because the institution is doing things that are wrong, and those things need to be corrected. He stood. That's all. That's the whole of it. He pushed back his chair. Hermione closed her briefcase with the neat click of someone who had been ready to deploy an enormous amount of legal material and had found, in the end, that the most devastating thing in the room was someone simply saying the truth plainly. We'll be in touch regarding the review of the Azkaban records, Harry said to Fudge. I'd appreciate a response within 2 weeks. After that I'll pursue the matter through other avenues. He let the sentence land simply, without drama. Other avenues, Fudge repeated. Yes. Harry looked at him with the patience of something that has been correct about many things over a very long time. 2 weeks, Minister. I think that's more than reasonable. He walked to the door. Behind him, the 2 Aurors, who had not moved, not spoken, had simply stood at the edges of the room and watched, exchanged a look that Harry didn't see. The look of 2 people who had come expecting to be impressive and had spent 40 minutes being invisible, who had just watched a 13-year-old dismantle every gambit in the room and walk out on his own terms. One of them, the one on the left, was a woman in her 30s with the watchful quality of someone who had spent a long time being underestimated. She looked at the closed door. She looked at Umbridge. She looked at Fudge. She made a decision, and filed it, and said nothing, and watched. Outside, in the corridor, Hermione exhaled for the first time in 40 minutes. She did it controlled, with the deliberate rhythm of someone who has been very carefully not doing the thing they needed to do and is now allowing themselves to do it. You were brilliant, she said. You were brilliant, Harry said. The Marchbanks ruling. I had the Ogilvy exception ready too. And the 1899 charter. I had 6 layers of legal argument prepared and you made them unnecessary in about 4 minutes. She didn't sound disappointed, she sounded like someone reporting an interesting outcome of an experiment. You were very calm. Should I not have been? No, you should. You absolutely should have been. It was extremely effective. She fell into step beside him toward the lifts. Umbridge is going to be a problem. Yes. She's not going to take the session the way Fudge will. He's going to worry and deliberate and eventually do the calculation of whether reviewing the Azkaban records is more politically dangerous than not reviewing them. She pressed the lift button. Umbridge is going to look for another angle. I know. She has the ear of the minister and the backing of several Wisengamot members, and she's been building toward increased ministry presence at Hogwarts for 3 years. Whatever she does next, it'll be targeted and it'll be framed as reasonable. The lift arrived. They stepped in. She's not done. No, Harry agreed. But neither am I. The lift began to rise. She'll make her move. And when she does, it'll tell us what she actually wants. You can learn a lot from what someone tries when they're committed. Hermione thought about this. What do you think she actually wants? Power, Harry said. Real power. Not Fudge's political power, that's contingent, negotiated, messy. She wants the kind of power that comes from being the person who defines the rules. Who decides what's classified as what? Who decides what category something falls into? He watched the level numbers change on the lift wall. She wants to be the one who gets to name things. And if she could classify you, then she'd have named something that nobody else could name. That would be, to someone like her, the most significant thing she'd ever done. He paused. I'm not going to let her. Not because of what it would do to me. Because of what it would do to everything else she'd use it for. Once you establish the precedent that the ministry gets to name things that exist outside its framework, then everything exists within the framework, Hermione finished. Even things that shouldn't. Yes. The lift reached the atrium. They walked out through the fountain and the golden statues and the polished floors, and Harry didn't look at the statue, the one with the witch and wizard standing elevated over the crouching figures, and Hermione looked at it once, briefly, and pressed her mouth together, and they went out through the phone box entrance into the grey London afternoon. The air tasted of the Thames and diesel and the specific cold of late October, and it was ordinary and real and correct. 2 weeks, Hermione said. 2 weeks, Harry agreed. You know they won't, no. They won't. He looked up at the grey sky. But it will matter that I asked. It will matter that the record shows I asked first, and they chose not to act. When the time comes, that matters. She was quiet for a moment. You're being very, what? Methodical, she said. For someone who is about to go dismantle a prison. I'm not going to dismantle it in a rage, Harry said. I'm going to dismantle it correctly. Because it's wrong and because there's a right way to do it and because Neville's parents and Sirius Black deserve to have it done the right way, not just the fast way. He paused. The fast way would be satisfying. The right way will matter. She looked at him for a moment. The London afternoon moved around them, grey and indifferent. The right way, she said. Yes. Right. She squared her shoulders in the way she did when she'd made a decision and was ready to execute it. Then we've got 2 weeks. And I've got notes to finish. She walked toward the underground entrance. Harry stood for a moment longer on the London street, under the grey sky, in the city of a million people who didn't know his name or his wings or the ancient thing that sat behind his ribs and measured the weight of things. The 2 weeks were already counting down. He knew, with the bone-deep certainty of something that had waited much longer than 2 weeks for things to be right, that Fudge would write a letter saying the ministry would begin a review. He knew the review would go nowhere. He knew, precisely and clearly, what he was going to have to do. He'd always known. He'd been ready since the mirror room. He walked to the underground, and took the train back to the connection point, and returned to Hogwarts through the flue in the leaky cauldron, and the school rose up on its hill in the October dark, warm-windowed and permanent, and in the deep sub-basement the door to the mirror room stood unlocked, and in a cell on a black island far to the north, a man was sitting with his hand against the wall, feeling it thrum. 2 weeks. Counting down.